House will please come back to order. Those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time. Consideration of further, lady from the 49th for an update on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Rules Committee has met, and House Bill 3136 has been moved from the special calendar to the House calendar. And committee substitute for House Bill 2195 has moved from the 2519 has moved from the House calendar to the special calendar.
Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2519, the Campus Self-Defense Act.
For what purpose does the lady from the 51st seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a parliamentary inquiry.
Lady may state her inquiry.
Thank you. After our Rules Committee vote, I was looking at Rule 70, which governs the special calendar. And the first sentence, which I think is the guiding authority for the whole rule, says, unless the House directs otherwise, the Committee on Rules shall arrange a special calendar. That's what gives the Rules Committee authority to do anything is because we govern the Rules Committee. So I was thinking about this, and I am wondering whether you agree or you have an opinion or whether or not by the motion to place, the House motion to place the bill on the special calendar, to take it off the House calendar and put it on the special calendar, that was defeated. And then there was a motion for reconsideration, and that was also defeated. And the way I interpret this rule is that the House was directing the Rules Committee that bill should not be considered, because we voted twice not to put it onto the House, onto the special calendar. Thank you. And so I'm wondering whether you might reconsider what you determined in the Rules Committee meeting.
The chair did consider the rule that the lady points out, and will certainly concede that the rule could have been better drafted. But it is the opinion of the chair that when the rules of the House empower the House to direct otherwise, that a majority of the House would be within its right to do so. However, the chair would also note that the motion offered for consideration by the House earlier in the day was a motion that the rules be suspended, which was not sustained.
Okay, and then we did that twice. We reconsidered that, and it was sustained a second time, or it was not sustained a second time. So you don't think that those two successful votes were a directive from the House under our House rules?
The chair is of the opinion that those actions taken by the House would not be within what the chair believes that rule to contain on its face. But as the chair noted in the Rules Committee meeting, there do exist other procedures available to all members of the House for calendar management at this time, which would allow the House to, as the lady points out, otherwise direct.
So are you reading language into this that for this directive that it must be a majority of the House, even though it required a rules suspension to overturn what the Rules Committee did?
That is the chair's conclusion based on the chair's understanding of the rule.
Is there any place in here that says you can read in that even though there are rules about 2/3 and 4/5, you can read in a majority?
It's the duty of the chair to make rulings under the rules of the House. The delegate chair's done so. If the lady wishes to take that up further, we'll be happy to do it. Chair's going as far as the chair knows how to go.
Okay. Could I have a moment?
Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2519, the Campus Self-Defense Act.
The gentleman of the 64th, Doggett Householder, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill would amend the provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to the authority of state boards to restrict the carrying of a concealed pistol and revolver on the property of a state public institutions of higher education. The bill amends provisions relating to the authority of the Higher Education Policy Commission, the Institutional Board of Governors, the West Virginia Council for Community and Technical College Education, and the governing board by stating that none of the statutory authorities granted shall be construed to provide the authority to restrict or regulate the carrying of a concealed pistol and revolver by a person who holds a current license to carry a concealed pistol and revolver, except as authorized in the new section 18B-4-5B. The proposed new section 18B-4-5B provides that any person who holds a current license to carry a concealed pistol and revolver is permitted to carry such weapon on the campus and in buildings of a state institution of higher education. The state institution of higher education is authorized to regulate possession of the concealed weapon, 1, at an organized event taking place at a stadium or arena with a capacity of more than 1,000 spectators, 2, at a daycare facility located on the property of the state institution, 3, in the secured area of any building used by law enforcement on the property of the institution, 4, in an area of the institution that has adequate security measures in place to ensure that no weapon is carried by the public in that area, 5, at the location of a formal disciplinary or grievance hearing for a student or employee of the institution taking place on the campus or in the building of the institution, 6, in sole occupancy offices on the campus or in the buildings of the institution, 7, at a primary or secondary education school-sponsored function taking place in a specific area on the property of the institution that is rented, leased, or under the exclusive use of the West Virginia Department of Education, the West Virginia Secondary Schools Activities Commission, a county school board or local public school for the time in which the function is occurring. Number 8, at a private function taking place in a specific area on the property of the institution that is rented, leased, or under the exclusive use of an entity not affiliated with the institution for the time period it is occurring. And number 9, where the possession of a firearm is prohibited by state or federal law. The Committee on the Judiciary reported the bill with an amendment that made the following changes to the bill. It limited the bill to carrying of concealed pistols and revolvers. It authorized state institutions of higher education to regulate the carrying of concealed pistols and revolvers in areas such as specifically designated for patient care or mental health counseling, in high hazardous and animal laboratories, in on-campus residence halls except common areas such as lounges, dining areas, and study areas, except for those employees with a current and valid license whose employment responsibilities require them to be in an on-campus resident hall and only for business purposes. It also required institutions to provide either a secure location for the storage of a pistol or revolver in at least one of the institution's on-campus resident halls, or an appropriate safe that may be installed in a residence room in any of the on-campus resident halls. And it also delays the implementation of the bill until July 1, 2020. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? For what purpose does the gentleman from the 22nd, Doggett Jeffries? First, the chair should note that the bill was advanced to third reading with amendments pending. So momentarily, the chair will ask the clerk to proceed to amendments. For what purpose does the gentleman from the 22nd, Doggett Jeffries, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to suspend the rules of the House and reject all amendments on House Bill 2519 in a mass.
The gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Jeffries, moves that the House rules be suspended and reject all amendments pending on House Bill 2519 in mass. The motion is not a debatable question. The gentleman from the 50th, Douglas Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rule suspension, if I'm correct, would require a two-thirds majority. Is that correct?
The gentleman is correct.
So if we proceed with the amendments pending, the vote would be nay. Is that correct?
The gentleman is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the motion by the gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Jeffries, that the rules be suspended and that all amendments now pending on committee substitute for House Bill 2519 be rejected. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Gentleman may state his point.
Mr. Speaker, on a two-thirds vote, I think a roll call is required, isn't it? It doesn't need to be
The
sustained.
roll call will be taken.
Thank you.
Roll call will be taken. The question before the House is the gentleman's motion that the rules of the House be suspended and that all amendments now pending on House Bill 2519 be rejected en masse. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 50 ayes, 48 nays, 2 members absent not voting, less than two-thirds having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the motion lost. The bill was advanced to third reading with amendments pending. Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I move that debate on all amendments be limited on this bill to one recognition per member, not to exceed 2 minutes in length, and that the total time for consideration of each amendment be limited to not more than 15 minutes.
Lady from the 49th moves that debate on each of the pending amendments on committee substitute for House Bill 2519 be limited to one recognition not to exceed 2 minutes per member per amendment, and that the total time for consideration of each amendment be limited to 15 total minutes. The gentleman from the 5th, Doug Pethel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of order.
Gentleman, state his point.
Is the majority leader's motion just on amendments?
Correct. The lady's motion is just on
And
amendments.
that does not affect final passage of the bill.
Lady's motion was specific to the amendments, Delegate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, on the adoption of the lady's motion, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 78 ayes, 20 nays, 2 members absent not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the motion adopted. Clerk will please report the First Amendment.
Delegates Hansen, Piles, and Fleischauer move to amend the bill. This is HFA Hansen, Piles, and Fleischauer 2-26.
The gentleman from the 51st, Delegate Hansen, wish to explain the amendment.
Yes.
Gentleman may
thank you.
proceed.
This amendment is related to one of the exemptions, exemption F that's on page 44, related to the ability to take disciplinary action. And it simply provides some clarity to the students and to the parents and the teachers and staff about what the universities can do, that they could suspend or expulsion of a student or discharge an employee if they do one of 3 things. If they carry a concealed deadly weapon while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, which we know is a problem. If they carry a concealed deadly weapon in a prohibited area or event, or if they unlawfully brandish a deadly weapon on campus. Now, I will say in support of this amendment that I have had numerous contacts from constituents, and there's been a little bit of confusion about where certain people stand. So let me just start with West Virginia University. Their recent statement on this is West Virginia University does not support this bill.
Point of order.
Clerk will pause the time.
Excuse me?
Gentleman may state his point.
He's talking to the bill. He's not talking to the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Chair thought he was talking to the amendment, Delegate, but
He just started talking about the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Chair will remind all members, we have many amendments pending tonight. We are going to be here while Chair would ask all members to observe the rules of the House to the fullest extent possible. Chair will allow the member to continue. Let's all cooperate tonight. Gentleman may continue.
A lot of people in my district have heartburn about this bill. One group of people that have heartburn about it are the administrators at WVU, and they would feel better if this amendment were passed. Other people who have heartburn about it are the faculty. The faculty senate unanimously passed a resolution with concerns about this bill. My amendment would help ease their concern. Another group of my constituents that have concern about this bill are the students, and the Student Government Association passed a resolution against this bill. Our amendment would help ease their concerns. I urge you to vote for the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Householder. Yes, gentleman from the 27th for a parliamentary inquiry.
Just want to be certain that this is not a conflicting amendment with Shot Amendment number 6, which deals with that same section. Want to get a clarification from the
Chair would ask the clerk to make that consideration at this time. Chair is informed by the clerk's office that both amendments could be could be considered independently and would not be mutually exclusive. Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman the 51st. The gentleman the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to urge rejection. If I look at the amendment right now, the last sentence, for carrying a concealed deadly weapon in a prohibited area or event or unlawfully brandishing a deadly weapon on the campus, that's already in the language. Alcohol and drugs, basically the amendment says that they want to have disciplinary action or suspension for discharge of an employee for carrying a concealed deadly weapon while under the influence of drugs. Ladies and gentlemen, public intoxication is already a crime. Illicit drug use is already a prohibiting factor federally. For those reasons, I urge rejection of the gentleman's amendment.
The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of conversation by people that claim to be experts on the Second Amendment. And I have found out something with the help of some researchers, professors at the university. Some of you know that the 10 amendments were adopted later. They were amendments, and they were adopted in 1791. And the author of the Second Amendment was James Madison. What you might not know is that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were involved in the formation of the University of Virginia. And that happened several years later in 1824. And I have with me today the Board of Visitors minutes. And I am speaking to the amendment. I would like to point out that the founder, the person who wrote the Second Amendment, wrote in 1824 that the University of Virginia, that students could be expelled for having guns on campus. And I'm going to go through these minutes. It won't take me very long because I have excerpts. I have all of the minutes if you're interested. And Thomas Jefferson was the rector, and he voted on it too. And so it was a meeting of the visitors of the University of Virginia. It took place on October 4th, on Monday, and there were several people present, including Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Breckinridge, Don Cock, George Loyal, and Joseph Cabell. And they proceeded to consider the regulations necessary to govern the university. And one of those that was agreed to, which was a supplementary enactment. There's several pages. Fighting with weapons which may inflict death or a challenge to such fight given or accepted shall be punished by instant expulsion from the university, not remissible by the faculty, and also no student shall, within the precincts of the university, appear in school with a stick or any weapon. So the founder of the Second Amendment did not believe that weapons were appropriate, and the University of Virginia, when it was enacted, when it started, expelled people for having weapons on campus.
Gentleman from the 46 will state his point.
Mr. Speaker, is every speaker limited to 2 minutes per amendment?
The clerk is keeping the time for each speaker's time.
I believe that we're quite past that. I don't know.
Well, I was interrupted several times. Are we counting the interruptions?
We are not.
Thank you.
Lady may continue.
Okay, I think that...
Lady's time is now expired.
I urge adoption of the amendment for...
The gentleman of the 37th, Doug Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr.
House will be in
Speaker.
order. House will be in order now. Gentleman 37th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the chairman, in stating his opposition to this amendment, said that public intoxication is already a crime. Sure, it's already a crime. It's a crime you get a ticket for. It's not a serious crime. It's definitely not a crime you get expelled for, or some of the colleges in the state wouldn't have any students. It's fairly common on college campuses for sometimes people drink too much, and that's why I think the amendment is important and should be adopted, and I support it, and I yield the rest of my time to the gentleman from the 27th.
The gentleman from the 14th, Doug Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just real quickly, I think everyone here knows that I'm not an attorney, but I believe under State Code 6177, subsection 3, it is already unlawful for a user of a habitually addictive or controlled substance to possess firearms. So I think this amendment is unnecessary. I urge rejection.
Gentleman from the 27th, Doug Porterfield, has raised a parliamentary inquiry. Gentleman may state his inquiry.
Did the delegate from the 37th yield his time to me? He said the delegate from the 27th, but if that's the case, I just want to know when my time is. But was that yielded to me, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman says it was.
Okay, thank you.
Does the gentleman wish to exercise it?
But I wish to take it off the clock so it knocks it down, and I will take all of my time in full expiration and silence. Thank you.
No other members are seeking recognition. Does any sponsor of the amendment wish to close debate on the amendment? The gentleman from the 51st, Doug Hanson.
This amendment is pretty simple. I've heard from a lot of constituents who are extremely concerned about this bill. And I feel like the least we can do is give them some assurance that appropriate disciplinary action will be taken when people do bad things with guns that they carry on campus, including carrying it while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, which we know is a big problem at WVU and other campuses, taking it to a prohibited area or event, or unlawfully brandishing it, for example, at a classroom. It's a simple amendment. If this bill passes, it will make people who have to live with the consequences of this bill just a little bit more comfortable. Thank you.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. Roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. The question is on the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 51st, Doug Hanson. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. There are 33 ayes, 66 nays, one member absent, not voting, less than a majority present, having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the amendment laws. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegates Scaff, Walker, Hanson, and Fleischauer move to amend the bill. This is HFA Scaff, Walker, Hanson, and Fleischauer 2-26.
Does the gentleman from the 35th, Douglas Scaff, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if this was an oversight or not in the bill, but I've been doing a lot of research with the other states that have this bill on the books. And basically, a lot of them restrict guns in transportation, like private aircraft that the university would take to and from games or events. They restrict it in buses, and they restrict it in vehicles that are owned and operated with other students. Now, I'm sure the intent might have been an oversight, or it might not, but it infringes, the University of Texas said it infringes upon the freedom of students who may not want to be around guns when you lock them into an area with 10 or 12 other students inside a bus or inside a car. So therefore, their freedoms are violated. So one of the most gun-bearing states, Texas, made that argument. And think about a private aircraft when the basketball team is flying to another event, and they're trapped on an airplane, and a gun accidentally goes off and shoots someone. What do you do so many miles up in the air? So many feet up in the air, I'm sorry. So for that reason, I think we should at least consider this amendment like so many other schools and states have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 15th, Delegate Foster.
I would question the chair. The amendment seems to be to the wrong page. So just point of clarification, the amendment may need adjusted if it's even going to be considered.
Chair would ask the clerk to note a technical correction if the amendment is adopted and conform the reference on the amendment to the correct page number. The gentleman, the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to urge rejection. This essentially kills campus carry by forbidding effective transportation across campus. Almost seems like, is this a movement to prevent handicapped students from the law? I urge rejection.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, do any of the sponsors wish to close debate on the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman, the 35th. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Noes have it. Chair declares the amendment law. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 1, reformed.
We have. Chair will note that we do have two conflicting amendments. This amendment will conflict with the one to be explained next. Chair will ask the gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, as the sponsor of this amendment, to explain the amendment. Then the chair will ask the sponsor of the conflicting amendment to explain the amendment. Then we will return to debate on the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The focus of this amendment is on the restriction contained on page 42 at line 11, which basically excludes an organized event taking place at a stadium or arena with a capacity of more than 1,000 spectators. Clearly drafted with larger universities and colleges in mind, and certainly to the disregard of smaller schools. What my amendment does is strike out the with a capacity of more than 1,000 spectators and adds in including but not limited to athletic competition, academic classes, team practice, intramurals, recreation, or any other permitted or scheduled use employed by students, faculty, or the public, or any other limitation required to comply with prohibitions established by an athletic conference in which the institution is a member. Let me say this. There are 6 of the 8 other states that have campus carry that have those kind of broad limitations. For instance, Arkansas excludes all athletic events and venues. Georgia excludes all buildings or property used for athletic, sporting events, or student housing. Mississippi excludes athletic facilities, any playing field, any practice facility, or anywhere an athletic event is being held. Oregon, each school has discretion over any building or workplace owned or controlled by the university, not limited to academic buildings, the student union, or athletics or performing art venues. Texas, as the University of Texas system has been given discretion to regulate exclusive zones, which include collegiate, high school, or professional sporting events, or any interscholastic event taking place anywhere on the campus. And finally, Wisconsin, they may bar firearms in campus building and athletic facilities. So in other words, this is not a rare exception. This is an accepted exclusion in 6 of the 8 other states that have campus carry. I think it's reasonable. It covers more and protects more of our colleges and universities than just the large ones, and I urge its adoption.
The gentleman from the 35th, Douglas Byrd, for the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think our amendments are pretty much the same, so I'd ask unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment, then to actually speak in favor if I could have some time for that.
The gentleman from the 35th asks unanimous consent to withdraw the conflicting amendment. Is there objection? Chair hears no objection. The amendment is withdrawn. Does the gentleman now wish to be recognized to speak in favor of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th?
Yes, thank you. Can I proceed, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker?
may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I got 2 minutes, so I got to be quick. I just support the gentleman's amendment. All of us have been to these games. All of us have been to these arenas. I mean, people are jumping. People are excited. And it came to a personal experience with me about 2 weekends ago when we have a dance here in Charleston called the Carnival. 1,000 people there, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. And my wife and I are sitting there on the dance floor, and boom, I thought it was a balloon. Come to find out, these people back here in the corner called me the next morning and said, I saw you at Carnival. Do you know what happened? A gun went off. Luckily, nobody was killed. But that's what I'm talking about. We know what these games are like. We see them on TV. We see the crowd getting rowdy. And I just think this is a great amendment offered by the gentleman from the 27th, and we should support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 64th, Douglas Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it defeats the purpose of the bill. It's far too expansive. If I look at it says the last line, prohibitions established by an athletic conference. That athletic conference is really abandoning the purview of the legislature. We're allowing potentially an out-of-state body to dictate constitutional rights of West Virginia citizens. So therefore, I urge rejection.
The gentleman from the 15th, Douglas Foster.
I believe that the amendment wasn't even, I didn't hear it fully be explained because the first section of the amendment was not mentioned, which adds 18B45B, which is in this bill, to an area that can be excluded, and which includes subsection A, which is a person who holds a current valid license, basically the whole operative language of the bill. So in my opinion, what this would do is completely negate the whole purpose of the bill by allowing an exemption on this first part of the amendment for somebody to regulate, someone who carries a valid license can be regulated according to this entire section. So I would urge rejection of the amendment.
The gentleman from the 35th, Douglas Scaff.
Will the chairman yield?
Chairman yield for questioning.
Yes.
Are you familiar that certain college conferences don't allow guns at their tournaments and events?
Yes. I think the SEC is one. The NCAA will not allow any type of championship events to take place in any place that allows guns.
How would this affect, you might laugh, but there's a gymnastic tournament every year called the EAGLE in Morgantown every year, who guns are not allowed at their conference tournament that's hosted in Morgantown. How would that affect that?
Well, my understanding of the NCAA rule is that if it's a championship event, that venue would not be eligible to host it. That's my understanding.
So an event that brings thousands of people to Morgantown would not be able to because of this law?
That would be my interpretation.
What about a soccer tournament? They host numerous regional games at our Division I national champion women, runner-up women's soccer tournament. Would they be allowed under this bill, under this provision, if the conference does not allow guns to host a regional game?
I guess it depends on the conference.
If the conference does not allow guns at an athletic event, would they then have to forfeit their home game and play at an away game?
I'm not sure I can answer that with any kind of certainty. I think they could easily pick a venue off campus.
Which defeats the purpose of having home field advantage.
Well, that could, but I mean, to say that it would be impossible, I can't say that, but I think they'd have to make other arrangements.
Speak to the amendment briefly, my last
Gentleman may
few seconds.
proceed.
University of Texas realized this because they hosted numerous championship games and regional events, and therefore took this off the books and made it illegal to have guns on their athletic events so they could host and have numerous and thousands of people come to their town and fill up their hotels and spend money in their town just by taking this off the books. They can now host games, and I think we severely limit ourselves for people to come to West Virginia and have a home court advantage and bring a championship back to our state.
The gentleman in the 32nd, Doug Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would rise respectfully to the chairman in opposition to this amendment. I just wanted to read something, and it's relation to specifically the words academic classes in this amendment. And I want to read this. However, at around 9:40 a.m., Cho, armed with a 9mm handgun and a .22 caliber handgun and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, entered a classroom building, chained and locked several main doors, and went from room to room shooting people. Approximately 27 people died right there in about 10 minutes. And I can't help but think, if there were several armed students in those classrooms, there probably would have been one person die that day in those classrooms, and it would have been the shooter, not the other 27 people. That, to me, is the heart of this bill. That it's not just about someone's right, but it's about self-protection. That's why the Second Amendment is there in the first place, that we can protect ourselves. Bad people are always going to have guns, and they're going to have them in the wrong places. And if we cannot protect ourselves from those threats, we're in trouble, just like these 27 people were. So for that reason, again, I respect the chairman, but I would oppose the amendment.
The lady from 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you. Question of the chair?
Does the gentleman yield for a question?
Yes.
Did you say that there were 6 colleges or universities that would not fit within the limit of the amendment?
The amendment is crafted based on Texas, okay, just to make that clear. And to clarify what the gentleman from the 32nd said, it does not deal with classrooms at all. In fact, if you read the lead-in, it's taking place at a stadium or arena. What the amendment is intended to do is to address classes that might be taking place in the arena or the stadium. But in terms of the 6 other states, their limitation is much broader. In other words, the areas that are excluded and protected from those carrying guns are much broader than a stadium arena with 1,000 seating capacity.
And actually, it's a little hard to read this amendment unless you refer back to the bill. But does it remove the limit of 1,000, capacity of 1,000? Is that what it does?
Yes, the intention is not to limit it to 1,000, the exclusion zone to 1,000 capacity. It's to protect the smaller schools that may have venues that have less than 1,000 capacity.
And is it just athletic events?
That's what it's designed. In arenas or stadiums and these type of events, it would be intramurals, recreation, athletic competition, classes that are athletic related, and any other limitation required. If their conference requires a limitation, then that would protect them from having to withdraw from an athletic conference.
Were you aware that the West Virginia University Mountaineers are hosting the National Rifle Championship in Morgantown?
No, I was not aware of that, but I know they have an exceptional rifle team.
Yes, they've won the championship 19 times.
Time is expired. And 2 minutes have expired. The gentleman with 22nd, Doug Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To address the concerns of the gentleman from the 35th, the NCAA 2018 policy here on weapons and firearms says, unless otherwise expressly authorized by applicable law, no firearms or weapons are permitted on these premises for the NCCA championships and events, and so on. So I would say, unless otherwise expressly authorized by applicable law, is what we are actually doing here, so that wouldn't be a concern of the NCAA. Thank you.
The gentleman with 64th, Doug Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I urge rejection. NCAA rules already state, unless otherwise allowed by state or federal law, Texas, Ohio, Utah, Georgia, Kansas, these are states that already have campus carry, no issues. Ohio State is the largest university system in the country, and there are no issues. WVU is in the Big 12, which is packed with Texas teams like TCU, Texas Tech, University of Texas, no issues. And they all have campus carry. I urge rejection.
Are there other members who wish to be recognized on this amendment? If not, does the gentleman from the 27th wish to close debate on the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad he mentioned all those universities. All of those universities, each one he indicated, protect athletic facilities. Texas specifically, anywhere where high school, collegiate, or professional sporting events or interscholastic events take place. Anywhere, that's protected. Georgia, Arkansas, Oregon, Wisconsin, Mississippi, all give greater breadth to their exclusion zones. And let me just say this, I can count. I know there's a desire for campus carry, but campus carry is not a uniform act. It's crafted in each place. This is not, you can't go somewhere and pull out a campus carry bill. And what I've attempted to do in my amendments is pull out some of the better provisions in some of these other states that take into account the variations in the places that they are. Texas can by no means be considered a liberal bastion. And they have these same protections there. Most of the amendments that I have crafted are based on Texas. I think they're reasonable. I think they add some additional flexibility to those institutions to direct activities on their own campuses. For those of you who are believers in local control, that's what I've tried to do, is build a little more local control into these amendments. In this particular one, I think this is necessary to protect not just the big institutions, but all of the institutions that are affected by this bill, and I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 48 ayes, 52 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. Less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 2.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment appears on page 42 at line 25. It's basically the, let me get to that line 25. This is a kind of vague provision of the bill. It says at a specific location of a formal disciplinary or grievance hearing for a student or employee of a state institution or higher education take place on the campus or in the building of the state institution of higher education. That is very restricted. The specific location could just assume the room in which it's located. There could be waiting rooms outside. There could be adjacent restrooms. All I'm trying to do is expand the area that would be protected for these type of grievance or disciplinary proceedings. And here's what I've said, including all walkways, hallways, open areas, adjacent meeting rooms, ante-rooms, restrooms, waiting rooms, or other areas located within a 150-foot radius of the spaces designated for or related to the disciplinary or grievance proceeding. In other words, it's just to provide a little bit of a safe zone around these highly charged areas. That's all it does. If a person leaves a grievance and goes to the restroom, he ought not to be confronted with someone carrying a handgun if it's a highly charged environment. It's just simply to provide some sort of safety zone around these areas where we have very sensitive, emotionally charged activities. I urge its adoption. This, by the way, came straight out of the Texas law.
The question for the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. The gentleman from the 29th, Douglas Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, looking at this amendment and looking at a lot of them, you know, we're just sitting here confronted with the idea that, well, okay, this on its face seems reasonable. But you start reading it, and it's within 150 foot of any walkway, hallway, open area, adjacent meeting room, anteroom, restroom, waiting room, or other areas located within a 150-foot radius. There's nothing specifying within this that the university can't designate more than one place for a disciplinary or grievance procedure.
And what we have been inundated with is communications from the universities of how much in opposition they are to this. Based on this amendment, all they would have to do is go in and designate a grievance procedure room in every dormitory, in every building on the campus. And at that point, this whole bill is of null effect. So the way that this is just broadly and openly written, you could essentially negate this whole bill with this one amendment right here. And I would urge that the members vote against it because it is too openly written. There is no limitation as to how many rooms that this could pertain to or buildings that this could pertain to, and it's just too broad. Thank you.
Ladies from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that the gentleman has misread the amendment. It says the 150-foot radius only applies to disciplinary or grievance procedures. No court would ever uphold his idea that they could set up a grievance process in every room just to avoid the bill. These are tense proceedings, and it makes a lot of sense to limit the number of people that can surrounding them. People can get very, very angry in them. And I think he's misrepresented the amendment. I think it makes sense to include these waiting rooms that are adjacent and the hallways and the walkways. So I think it's a sensible amendment designed to limit harm. I urge adoption.
The gentleman, the 64th, Dr. Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I urge rejection. I agree with the gentleman from the 29th. So if someone's walking by an area where a discipline hearing is prohibited, how in the world would they even know? The 150-foot radius just doesn't make sense. The language already includes the requested language from the largest university in the state. I urge rejection.
The gentleman, the 27th, Dr. Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman yield?
Chairman does yield.
Yes.
Chairman, what I want to ask you is this 150-foot radius, would this be to the people being disciplined or anyone within that 150-foot radius could not have a firearm?
Well, first of all, let me correct, I think, a misreading of the bill. It says a hearing taking place, so it's not, you can't designate a room where there's no hearing taking place. So the plain reading of the statute as it appears before the amendment indicates this has to be the specific location where the hearing is then taking place. Okay, your question is, yes, it would apply to anyone who's within that protected area because of the emotionally charged and dangerous environment that takes place with grievances and these type of disciplinary hearings such as an expulsion or so forth. So the 150 feet would create some sort of safe zone within the area where the hearing is actually taking place.
But it would include anyone that, even if they were not involved in the grievance process, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it would. It would be a safe zone where no guns would be permitted.
Thank you. May I speak to the amendment, please?
Gentleman may proceed.
I ask for rejection of this amendment. Once again, this is a clear-cut measure of gun control. People that are innocent, that have no part in that grievance process, should not be punished and have their rights withheld from them. This is bad, and I ask for rejection of the amendment. Thank you.
Does the gentleman, the 27th, Delegate Schott, wish to close debate on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Briefly, these hearings are some of the places where violent eruptions occur. It's a highly charged environment where someone's employment may be at risk or some student might be in the risk of expulsion. This simply takes the exception contained in the bill and broadens the area so it's not artificially restrained. If a person steps outside the room, they shouldn't be in a position to either be endangered by a firearm during the course of the grievance hearing or endanger someone else by the firearm. It's a reasonable expansion of the area to be protected. It's the same as they've done in Texas. Once again, as I said, Texas is no liberal bastion. I think we should follow the guidance that's been provided by the folks in Texas and adopt this amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 34 ayes, 66 nays, 0 members absent, not voting, less than a majority, and having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 3.
The gentleman 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the amendment.
Speaker, this amendment begins on page 42 and carries over to 43 and adds language to the section dealing with a secondary or primary school-sponsored function, and simply follows our guiding star in this case from Texas, which further defines what a school-sponsored function is, to make it clear that these type of events are protected based on federal law and local state law as well. And here's what it says: for the purposes of this subsection, school-sponsored function includes, but is not necessarily limited to, tours, demonstrations, field trips, events, clubs, camps, classes, clinics, programs, and the like, which are authorized by the West Virginia Department of Education, the West Virginia Secondary Schools Activity Commission, a county board, or local public school, including K-12 school district or individual schools, as a curricular, co-curricular, or interscholastic activity managed or supervised in part by the department, commission, board, district, school, or school employee. When a and this is important, when a K school-sponsored activity is so conducted in a location, the concealed carrying of pistols or revolvers is permitted. A sign reading pre-K-12 school-sponsored activity in progress will be posted during these activities. This is a reasonable explanation of what we're talking about in this section of the proposed bill, and it basically expands it to make it clear that these areas are protected, but that they have to be marked by signage that would indicate that this event is taking place. Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman 27th. The gentleman 15th, Delegate Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I believe this amendment is very, very broad. It includes anything that was a school, had anything to do with a school and a school program or anything would be included in this. But there's also a big problem that I see for people even abiding by this law, because it says a sign reading pre-K-12 at a school-sponsored activity. It doesn't say signs at each entrance to the activity. How would a gun owner even know that they were prohibited in this case? Because it just says a sign. That sign could be anywhere, just right in the middle of the activity, and then they wouldn't be able to see it. I believe that that would create a big problem for me, and also an issue where somebody may be unintentionally trapped into a felony offense, I believe. So I would urge rejection of this amendment.
The gentleman, the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I do agree with the gentleman from the 15th. This is way too broad, and again, was clarified by this legislature in 2014, and then again last year. The specific area, as long as it is closed to the general public or those not in attendance of the pre-K-12 event, is already prohibited in current law. I urge rejection.
The lady from the 51st, Delegate Fleischauer.
Thank you. I think that with respect to this amendment, if you read the last line of the amendment, mine just bounced, it says that a sign reading pre-K-12 school-sponsored activity in progress will be posted during these activities. So it's not going to be that hard for people to figure out that there are many, I know at the WVU, there are many activities that involve their exercise activities, their swimming lessons, there are music lessons, there are all kinds of lessons. This is an easy thing to do, to put up a sign so that we don't have to scare the heck out of kids. We had testimony the other day about how scared children are about guns, and I think that we should protect them as much as we can. I urge adoption of the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, the gentleman 27th is recognized to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to read what's already in the bill. It certainly does not indicate there's any any notice to the public of where this event's going to be. This amendment adds the requirement of a school that a poster be posted. It clarifies. It doesn't do any harm at all to the bill. I can't imagine why anybody would oppose this other than the fact that we have marching orders from the NRA that we can't accept any amendments no matter how worthy they are, and I suppose that's the gospel as if it were brought down from the mountain on clay tablets. But in any event, the school sponsored, this is really for the kids, folks. We heard that expression a lot. This is for the kids, and we shouldn't be parsing words about protecting the kids. I can't imagine why how this could harm the bill in any way, but it certainly makes it clear, and in fact, I think it actually improves the bill by requiring signage. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th. A roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. Of this question, there are 45 ayes, 55 nays, 0 members absent, not voting, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 4.
The gentleman 27th is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This again modifies a section of the bill based on what we've learned from the Texas's effort. Let me just point out that Texas went to great lengths to try to come up with policies to adopt their statute. Their statute basically gives the institutions the ability to craft the policies. In this particular case, this amendment appears on page 43 at line 43, and the language just simply says, in a specifically designated areas in which patient care or mental health counseling is being provided. I've simply added to that language, waiting rooms for designated patient care or mental counseling areas may be considered a designated area. This prohibition includes not only traditional patient care facilities, but also research labs and other research areas where and when, as part of the research process, patient care is delivered by or under the supervision or directions of a licensed healthcare provider. Simply clarifies the intent of this section to protect those areas where there is either mental health counseling or patient counseling provided by licensed healthcare providers. Includes the waiting rooms in which these people have to wait while they're waiting to get their care. I see it causes no harm whatsoever to the bill. It clarifies the intention of the bill, once again based on substantial work done by the folks in Texas as they crafted their policies for the institutions that implement the campus carry. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. The gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is redundant and makes the language confusing. The language already includes the requested language of the largest hospital system in the state. I urge rejection.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? Does the gentleman wish to close debate?
The language is only confusing to those who can't read the English language. It's pretty clear what it does. Waiting rooms for designated patient care. There's nowhere in the current bill that it talks about waiting rooms. And I think that we all know that it wasn't crafted voluntarily by the people in the largest institution of the state. They had a gun to their head. I urge adoption of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. Of this question, there are 42 ayes, 56 nays, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 5.
The gentleman 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This appears on page 44 at line 8 after the words study areas, and it adds some additional exclusions. The first is a ticketed or charitable theater or film performance, musical recital, lecture, speech, live performance, entertainment, concert, or other event where the introduction of firearms is inconsistent with the safety and security of the event. Concealed carry of pistols or revolvers is not prohibited at publicly accessible outdoor grounds or rights-of-way pertinent to the above-noted premises, including parking lots. In other words, it limits the concealed carry to those particular events inside but not outside. Secondly, it clarifies that concealed carry is prohibited in areas for which state or federal law, licensing requirements, or contracts require total exclusion of firearms solely at the discretion of the state or federal government, or firearm exclusion is required by a campus accrediting authority. Where appropriate, signage will conform to the overriding federal law, state law, or accrediting requirements. And the final addition is gun exclusion zones, if created by state law, as well as those created by public policy, may sometimes comprise only a policy of a portion of a building. In some instances, it may not be feasible to exclude concealed carry pistols or revolvers only from designated exclusion zones, and then it lists factors that should be considered in determining that. Once again, this is verbatim out of the Texas policy guidelines that applies to all of the university systems in Texas. I think it's a reasonable addition of these areas to cover from campus carry. It's consistent with the other 5 states that I talked about, and I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman the 27th. The gentleman the 15th, Douglas Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would recognize that this one's also the wrong page, so a technical correction would be in order. Change it to 43 instead of 45 for the page number. But also, I would be opposed to this amendment. The gun exclusion zones listed in sub 15. And the only thing that it says in here, it says how these shall be determined, and it says the percentage of the assignable space or rooms in a building are designated as exclusion zones. So anything under that section where the gun is excluded, but it doesn't say what percentage. And that's where my concern is what percentage would that be dictated as, and we have no demonstration of what that would be. So I would assume that any building that had any portion of it designated as one of these exclusion zones, the entire building and anything connected to it could be excluded. So I would urge rejection of the amendment.
The gentleman the 35th, Doug Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman yield to a couple questions?
Certainly.
Under the bill now, are concealed weapons allowed in the law school at, say, WVU?
Are they allowed there now?
If the bill passes, would it be allowed?
No. I mean, yes, they would be.
It would be, right?
Yes.
And so when I was in law school, we had the honor of having United States Supreme Court Justice, the notorious RBG, as we call her, come to the law school. Would she be permitted to come to the law school if this bill went into effect without your amendment?
Probably not. Not unless, now let me just say in all fairness, the bill does contain a provision that the university or college can create a gun-free zone with appropriate security devices, which means armed guards and magnetometers, metal detectors. So if the school wanted to incur the expense of putting armed guards at all the public entrances and those type of equipment, then probably this could be a gun-free zone. It could be an exclusion zone. But other than that, no.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman the 64th, Doug Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman here is making this a maze for people who want to follow the law. I believe it's just an attempt to make it too difficult to understand the law. For instance, in item 13, talks about theater, film performance, music recitals. So I guess a father can't watch his daughter at a recital. Number 14, the language already states were prohibited by state and federal law. 15, these gun exclusion zones. This is just a drastic attempt to confuse everyone. And then item 16, at the end of that sentence is prescription medicine. So I guess it's now illegal for me to carry if I have my Z-Pack or any cough medicine on me. I urge rejection.
The gentleman the 37th, Doug Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chairman of the Judiciary yield?
Chairman does yield.
Yes.
This would include like a guest lecture series, like if a college invited a touring speaker.
The amendment would protect those areas where there might be a controversial speaker, for instance, whether it's a person you want to hear or a person you don't want to hear, yes. It would protect that. As the bill currently, as the bill currently stands, unless you had armed guards and the electronic equipment, you could not make that a gun-free zone.
Okay. So that couldn't be a gun-free zone unless this amendment was passed if there was like a guest speaker that was brought into a university or college, right?
Yeah, the amendment covers lecture series and so forth.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to speak to the amendment.
Gentleman, proceed.
I think this is also an important amendment, and unlike the Chair of Finance, I do think it's fairly simple to understand. I can understand it. That says something. We've heard about this in one of our major committees. A lot of these colleges and universities will bring in speakers. Sometimes they kind of test the limits of the First Amendment. I'm all for their First Amendment rights. I think we should be hearing all kinds of ideas on college campuses. However, sometimes they are unpopular ideas, and they might not choose to come to one of our campuses so they know that somebody in the crowd is going to be armed, maybe several people in the crowd who are going to be armed. Some of those people might not like what they're saying. This amendment could possibly stop a potentially violent situation. I'm all for the Second Amendment. I'm also for the First Amendment on our college campuses, and I believe this amendment protects people's right to their First Amendment on our college campuses. Let's vote for this amendment, please.
The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman yield?
Chairman does yield.
Chairman, to your understanding, and I know you've been in a lot of different situations, but they mentioned RBG. I'm assuming they're referring to one of our Supreme Court justices. From your understanding, do those type of officials usually have some sort of security under normal circumstances?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And if people are like these speakers that come in, there's not security there at these particular meetings where a potential controversial speaker would be?
There, depends a lot on what the college's policy is. I suppose the college could assign security. They would, but in order to comply with the terms of the bill, they would have to have not only armed guards, but they'd also have to have electronic monitoring devices such as magnetometers or metal detectors.
Thank you. May I speak to the amendment, please?
Gentleman, may proceed.
As we have seen oftentimes, or in something that actually has been discussed earlier in the session, when controversial speakers are at college facilities, there is security usually to take care of these types of things. Once again, I believe this is a broad overreach, and I would ask for rejection of the amendment. We can see time and time again where there is plenty of protection for this, and there is security at places regardless of whether it would be a sporting event, whether it would be a special speaker, or whatever the context would be. And law-abiding citizens being there with the ability, with their Second Amendment right, could actually help to prevent these types of things from happening. I'd like to urge rejection of the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 58th, Doug Coles.
Mr. Speaker, will the chairman yield for a question?
Chairman does yield for a question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, this isn't a poison pill to the bill.
Pardon me?
This is not a poison pill to the bill?
No, none of these are poison pills. I tried to improve my attitude is if you've got a bill you hate, you try to make it a little more bearable. And I think everybody knows I think this is a bad idea, and I don't think that having more guns in schools should be our top priority. But I have not input any poison pills in this bill. I've taken provisions out of the Texas or other statutes that are currently in place. So no, it's not intended to be a poison pill.
I had a call from the local university president where I'm from and asking me about finding a way to exempt theaters and lectures and music performances, exactly what's included in this. But in addition to that, this amendment is number 16. You can't be drunk or drinking or under the influence of drugs. That also seems reasonable. The only thing that gives me a little pause is the gun exclusion zone. That's appropriate signage in specific areas for a specific time. Do I understand that right?
Yes, if you're talking about number 15, if that's a reason for your heartburn, I could certainly reform that out. But I think the 13 and 14 and 16 are extremely important to the amendment.
Okay, and if I happen to be in one of those spaces where I'm not supposed to be, do you know what happens? Am I just asked to leave that area?
Well, you're subject to if you're a student, you're subject to discipline. But otherwise,
I'm just a visitor to the play.
If you're a visitor, they asked you to leave.
Thank
you
you
don't leave, you're trespassing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th? Does the gentleman wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we're just trying to give these universities and I'm trying to speak for those universities and colleges that weren't included in the negotiation, the so-called one-party negotiation. My emails, my texts, my calls have all indicated that we're not going far enough to protect areas that people have an expectation that they don't have to go in there and sit next to someone that's carrying a weapon. Theaters, film performance, musical recitals, so forth. The last paragraph, I'm trying to conform to the 2 minutes as well. The last section I didn't get to, it just says, no one may possess a firearm on campus while engaged in any type of criminal activity, while consuming alcohol, while under the influence of alcohol, or while under the influence of any drug, including illegal drugs and prescription medication. Can't imagine why anybody would be opposed to that unless they're just following orders. I urge adoption of the amendment.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 27th will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. There are 43 ayes, 57 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. Less than the majority have voted in the affirmative. The chair declares the amendment lost. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 6.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the amendment.
I am not deterred, Mr. Speaker. In case you didn't guess, my favorite book was Man of La Mancha. Okay. All right, this deals with, basically says accidental discharge of a concealed pistol or revolver is conduct which may be subject to disciplinary action. Really simple and really straight out. It's on page 44, basically deals with the authority of the state institution of higher education to deal with incidents on campus, and conspicuous by its absence is any reference to someone who has an accidental discharge of the concealed pistol. There apparently is absolutely no repercussions of that. This is a simple amendment. Once again, Texas thought about this. Apparently we didn't. I think it's appropriate that that person who, and by the way, there are incidences of that documented in Texas and elsewhere, where accidental discharge, in some cases not injuring people, in other cases injuring people, that certainly ought to be subject to disciplinary action. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. The gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd have to rise in opposition to this one, and I'll preface it by saying that I was neither endorsed nor received any money from the NRA or the CDL in the last election. As a matter of fact, they endorsed my opponent. So I'm not beholden to anybody when I'm standing up and speaking about these amendments. I'm not towing anybody's line. I'm looking at a law that a lot of us wanted that almost got thrown in a ditch this morning. So when we look at this amendment, this says accidental discharge of a concealed pistol or revolver is conduct which may be subject to disciplinary action. The thing is, this is an accidental discharge. Not even a police officer is disciplined for an accidental discharge. They are disciplined if they are negligently firing their firearm, if they are negligently playing with their firearm, but an accidental discharge is not even punishable upon a law enforcement official. So looking at this, this gives a God's honest accident the ability to expel a student. And this is going to have a chilling effect on someone's Second Amendment rights or Article 3, Section 22 rights under the West Virginia Constitution to defend themselves. And I would urge rejection of the amendment.
The gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's already in the language. If you look at 18B-4-5B, subsection G, breach of peace, regardless of it, if the firearm is holstered or on about the license holder's person. Urge rejection.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? Does the gentleman wish to close debate on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the gentleman was referring to the criminal section of the code or of the proposed bill. Let me just say that there are at least 9 documented incidents of individuals that had accidental discharges, and what we're talking about is a negligent discharge, not an accidental one. You're supposed to either have your weapon holstered and concealed, or you have it in your purse. And if it goes off, then you are obviously negligent, and you should pay the consequences of that. It doesn't necessarily mean that's expulsion. It just says disciplinary action. I can't imagine why anyone would defend this provision in view of the number of incidents, 3 in Texas, where other people were shot as a result of an accidental discharge. Sometimes they shot themselves, which I guess you could say was enough of a consequence. But there are accidental discharges throughout Utah, Texas, Mississippi, Idaho, Colorado, all of which have campus carry laws, all of which discipline students when these things happen, and that's what this language is in there for. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ask for the result of this question. There are 41 ayes, 58 nays, 1 member absent, not voting, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 7.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that amendment was, if it's number 7, was withdrawn.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment?
I thought it had already been withdrawn, but I do ask unanimous consent to withdraw it.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-25, number 8.
The gentleman 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the next amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we've looked at Texas and all the work that they did to try to come up with some reasonable guidance, and basically what this does is require some consultation with students, staff, and faculties regarding the various policy implications of the campus carry, and that the policies adopted by the institution follow that procedure in terms of consultation. And the part of the problem with the bill as it currently stands is there's a lot of gray areas in the, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I picked up the wrong one.
Clerk has projected number 8.
I believe that's, I'm going to ask unanimous consent to withdraw that. I believe that's covered by number 10, maybe, just a second. Number 9, reform. So I'd ask unanimous consent to withdraw number 8.
Is there objection? Chair hears no objection. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott and Scaff move to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott and Scaff 2-26, number 9, reformed.
The gentleman 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill that's being considered allows an 18-year-old with a provisional license to also have campus carry rights, as well as someone with a normal concealed carry license. I should say that only 2 states out of the 10 that have any type of campus carry allow 18-year-olds to have concealed carry permits. Utah and Idaho are the only 2, and Utah requires enhanced training in order for an 18-year-old to have a concealed carry permit, a provisional type permit. Here's the key to that. I think part of the reason that we seem to believe that concealed carry permits are basically carry with it greater protections is the ability to do a background check. Now, with respect to an 18-year-old, think about this. If an 18-year-old, when he was 16, shot somebody and he wasn't prosecuted as an adult, he would have a sealed juvenile record. So the protections that you have with a normal concealed carry permit for somebody over 21 in terms of a more in-depth background check, you do not have. You do not have those same protections with an 18-year-old because of the fact that the juvenile record is under seal, and without a special court order to open that juvenile record, you will never know what that juvenile did 2 weeks before he or she turned 18. So what this amendment does, it says, for purposes of this section, a license to carry a concealed deadly weapon refers to current and valid license lawfully issued by the state of West Virginia pursuant to section 6174, or to a current and valid provisional license lawfully issued, and it shows the code section, to a currently serving or honorably discharged member of the United States Armed Forces, Reserve or National Guard, or a current or valid license permit recognized under 6176A. That's a reciprocity provision. So in other words, what we're saying here, you can be an 18-year-old and be able to carry, but you have to be a member of or an honorably discharged member of the armed forces, and that's recognized, and those folks are also, they're subject to background checks before they go into the military, and they're also extensively trained. So as I said before, only two states allow 18-year-olds to have a concealed carry permit on campus, and one of those requires extensive additional training. I think this is a reasonable provision to limit access to the universities and colleges by those who have not been properly vetted and are clearly not trained adequately. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman 27th. The gentleman 29th, Doug Steele.
Yes, I'll have to rise in opposition to the amendment. You know, if we look at this, there's been a lot of times that I've been in different meetings around here or seen different laws that a lot of times we try to color something up with saying we're doing something for veterans. And as someone who served honorably in the Marine Corps, I can stand up and see through that. What this is seeking to do is exclude probably 85–90% of the students that are on our college campuses right now. I got 4 daughters that hopefully will go to college in West Virginia. And I worry about them. I worry about them as they go about in different places and different things and going through different buildings because I see a university that, you know, if we're talking about WVU, where there is a high number of sexual assaults. There's a high number of assaults in general. And while we can look at this amendment and say, yes, it's right. These people actually have extra training. You know, when I was 18 years old, I was walking through LAX airport with a machine gun, 249 SAW, when I was in the Marine Corps. But what we're saying right here is if you're not that guy, you don't get to protect yourself. That's not what 322 of the West Virginia Constitution says. It says that every citizen of this state has the opportunity to defend themselves and bear arms. And that goes beyond the federal Second Amendment. If you read what the West Virginia Constitution says, what this is doing is placing an unreasonable restraint that's palatable to us because of how it's colored in green, the green of our armed forces. I would say no, it's going to exclude just about nearly every student from having the protections under this code that we all seek to give them, and I'd urge you to reject the amendment.
The gentleman, the 35th, Doug Scaff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman of finance yield just for a second?
Chairman does yield.
Absolutely.
You had stated that really no incidents in the state of Texas. Is that correct?
I just said they don't have any problems with campus carry.
What about,
I didn't say anything about incidents.
Okay. What about Georgia?
I didn't say. I just said they all have campus carry.
But no real incidents to report?
I just stated that they all have campus carry.
No problems?
I didn't state that, sir.
Oh, I thought you did. I'm sorry. My point is, you think it's a coincidence that all those states that haven't had any incidents, they all have to be 21 or over?
I don't know that, sir.
Okay. I want to read you something real quick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can speak to the amendment.
Gentleman, may proceed.
Senate Bill 11, Texas. Senate Bill 11 provides that after consulting with students, staff, faculty regarding the nature of student population on each campus, specific safety considerations, and the uniqueness of each campus environment, decided to enact 21 or over policy. The one part of that, after consulting with students, staff, and faculty. Georgia, Georgia campus presidents come together unanimously decide to make campus carry legal on all campuses for 21 and over. No incidences have been reported. Campus carry with the and they've limited it to dorms, no frats, no athletic events. Might be a coincidence why there's no no incidences. And I want to quote somebody, one of my favorite presidents. I have my timer on, I have 30 seconds. So one of my favorite presidents is Ronald Reagan. You know what Ronald Reagan said? I'm allowed to have Ronald Reagan as a favorite president. Ronald Reagan said, just because government can doesn't mean you should. Ladies and gentlemen, we make this 18 and over, we'd be one of the only states. We're going to pass this bill. Let's have some reason. Let's join every other state and start at 21, and let's go from there and make a safe campus. Thank you.
The gentleman from 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this is insulting to our law-abiding young citizens. It basically wants you to pick one or the other. Do you trust 18 to 20-year-olds, and do you want to respect their constitutional rights or not? A provisional permit requires background check and training. For those reasons, I urge rejection.
The gentleman from the 51st, Delegate Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of the provisions in the bill that I've heard about repeatedly from people in Montague County. People just cannot believe that 18-year-olds whose brains aren't fully formed yet, who don't always make good decisions, who we can't do proper background checks on, as the chair of Judiciary explained, that they'll be carrying guns at our universities. People are just scratching their heads thinking that we've lost our mind down here in Charleston. So I think of all the amendments that are being proposed, this is one that hopefully will get a lot of support. And I'll also note a technical issue with the amendment. I believe that it inserts a paragraph without deleting the corresponding paragraph, and if that could just be noted in case the amendment passes. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 15th, Delegate Foster.
Thank you. Real simply, if we believe that somebody has to sign up for the draft at 18 and has the ability to go to war for us, I believe that they should also, if they have under a provision of our law the ability to carry a concealed carry, then they should also not be prohibited of their Second Amendment rights.
The gentleman from the 50th, Delegate Angelucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with all due respect to our finance chair, I don't think this is insulting whatsoever to our young adults. In agreement with my friend from the 35th, if we can't trust an 18-year-old with a beer, how can we trust them with a deadly, lethal weapon in the classroom? Let's use some common sense. Let's not be the #1 state in the country to put a lethal weapon in the classroom. Let's not do that. We're smarter than that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 62nd, Delegate Bibby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who served under President Reagan as Commander-in-Chief, he may have said what the government can do it, but I don't think he would ever speak about having the government take away an individual's Second Amendment rights or any rights under the Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, this is what we're talking about today. We're protecting the constitutional rights of 18 to 21-year-olds. So I would highly urge that we reject this amendment and we support the Constitution and we support the rights of everyone to protect themselves, which is more than just the constitutional rights. It's a natural right of all of us. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 14th, Delegate Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak in opposition to this amendment. This goes to the heart of the bill, and this is what we're talking about here, is giving 18-year-olds and up who have a provisional license the ability to protect themselves. Those are the students who, in most cases, may need the protection. 18-year-olds have the right to vote. They drive cars. I think one of the main differences between those of us who think that the students should be able to defend themselves and those who think they can't is that we have great confidence in our students that if we give them this responsibility and this ability to protect themselves, they will be able to handle it. These are the best and brightest students we have in the state. I think they can handle the responsibility of having a firearm and protecting themselves, and beyond that, they have the right to do that by our Constitution. So I urge rejection of this amendment.
The lady from 38th, Dr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in opposition, and I will say that I find the gentleman who proposed this amendment to be intelligent and thoughtful, and in our short time together, he's been more gracious to me, really, than I have deserved. So this is nothing against him. My concern in particular is if we begin carving away portions of our reciprocity agreements with other states. The AG negotiates our reciprocity agreements with other states, and it has been a huge effort by this state to get as many reciprocity agreements as we currently have. So I'll say that that is where my concern lies. I don't want to jeopardize that work. I believe we're up to somewhere around 36 states. That's a significant investment that I feel could possibly be jeopardized. I will also say, on behalf of my friend from the 44th, I find his brain to be well-formed, and he is capable of making intelligent decisions. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 47th, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. Last year, there were 13 reported rapes on WVU's campus, let alone the unreported ones. I don't think any of those attackers asked for ID of their victims, and I don't think this body should be doing that either. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, the gentleman from the 27th is recognized to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the amendment's not intended to suggest that every 18-year-old is not capable, but I think we need to distinguish between an 18-year-old at a keg party and an 18-year-old draftee who's gone through 6 or 8 weeks or months of training, has learned to become disciplined and follow instructions of an officer who's much more mature. We're talking about two different animals, frankly. We're talking about two different things. Yes, we draft 18-year-olds, but we don't give them a gun and send them to Iraq or Afghanistan without any training. We spend substantial resources, and we take a lot of time to train them so that they're responsible when they go somewhere, but even more importantly, that they follow directions and they have discipline. A background check that's required on a provisional permit is no background check at all if you can't go back and look beyond 1 year. And that's the problem with the background checks for provisional licenses. We're the only state that will do this. The 2 states that have done it, and allowed 18-year-olds, have done it by court order. That's the only way they did it. Their legislatures didn't do it. Every state that's considered this, many states have rejected the concept entirely of campus carry, but those who have campus carry by action of the legislature in every single case, they limited it to those over 21. I think this is a reasonable amendment. I understand where I'm fighting. I'm going swimming upstream on this, but I still urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman 27th. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 38 ayes, 62 nays, 0 members absent, not voting, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the amendment lost. Clerk will report the next amendment.
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Schott 2-26, number 10, reformed.
The gentleman 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All this amendment does is require some information to be provided to us, so that those of you who feel like there's no risk, no cost, no downside of this bill will be able to be confirmed, and those of us who are concerned about downside, about collateral damage and so forth, will be able to determine whether we were right or wrong. What this does, it just says, no later than December 15th of each calendar year, the state institutions of higher learning shall report on any issues related to implementation of the Campus Self-Defense Act. They will make that report to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance, and it will include all financial effects and costs, any effect on enrollment, any effect on retention or recruitment of faculty or staff, any incidents on campus related to concealed carry of a pistol or revolver, or any other issue which the state institution of higher learning identifies as relevant information. That's all it is, just asking for feedback. Did we do the right thing? Was it worth the cost? How can anybody be afraid of that? How can anybody be afraid of getting information unless you want to remain in the dark under the cloud of the NRA? This is a reasonable request. It gives you information to decide whether we need to make any modifications, whether those of us who are concerned were overly concerned, or whether those of you who are not concerned perhaps should have been concerned. I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th, the gentleman of the 64th, Douglas Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, campuses already have to report crimes, and if in the unlikely event there are any issues, the normal legislative process can be used. I urge rejection.
The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have hardly seen a bill this session that didn't require a report back to the legislature. And if our world in towns and communities that have colleges and university is going to be so wonderful after we pass this bill, then there's nothing to be afraid of. The information that will come back will be, that those of us who are concerned, those of us who believe this is not the right direction to go, we're wrong. So what possible thing do we have to be afraid of? We have reports to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance all the time. And it's an important way that we get information. And this is a very controversial issue in our communities that have colleges and universities that have not asked for this. So I urge adoption of the amendment, and I appreciate the gentleman from Mercer for offering this. I think it's very sensible, very reasonable, and I think it should be adopted.
The gentleman from the 29th, Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, the gentleman from the 27th is right. How could you not want this? Other than it's coming from the same people that I've gotten, 500 emails from, all in opposition to this bill. So we're going to get a report from WVU, Marshall, and the other universities, public universities throughout the state. I can tell you what the report's going to say right now. It's going to say that enrollment is declining, even though enrollment has been declining for a very long period of time. It's going to say that students report having a sense that their First Amendment rights are being repressed because of the presence of firearms on campus, even though that those same students for the last 10 years have been reporting that their teachers have been taking away their First Amendment rights in class. So we're just setting this up for a report. We could sit here, all of us could sit down and write this report right now of exactly what it's going to say. If we really wanted a true report, we would ask for it to come from some form of law enforcement. We would ask for it to come from some type of unbiased entity. And I cannot say at this point, based off of the communications that I've received from the various universities throughout this state, that they are unbiased. If anything, they are completely biased. And to take a report from them at this point on this issue, to me, is laughable. Now, if you want to report, you want to report. I think that's fine. But the simple fact that these universities are going to be the ones preparing it, when they're the ones that are going to try to take away right now the rights of 18 to 20-year-olds from being able to defend themselves from assaults and sexual assaults and robberies and different crimes on campus, I think that this is a little tongue-in-cheek, and I'd vote against it.
The gentleman from the 35th, Douglas Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd rise in support of this amendment, and to address the commentary of the delegate that just spoke, I'd like first to ask unanimous consent to print his words in the appendix of the journal, because then I'd like to compare what he thinks the report's going to say, and let's just see what it says. I challenge you. Let's just see what it says in the first year. Do you think the WVU is going to... Let's...
Is the gentleman making a request?
Yeah.
Are there objections? Objection is heard.
I move.
Gentleman moves that the comments by the gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Steele, on the amendment number 10 be printed in the appendix of the journal. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. Motion is adopted. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you. Is this at the point I dropped the mic? No, I'm just joking. On a serious note, so let's just see what the report says. The other gentleman from the 35th brought up a good point. There's going to be tournaments and things that we might miss out on because of this. A report does not restrict anybody's Second Amendment right. It is a report. It's not messing up this bill at all. Who cares? We are supposed to be fiscally responsible. Everybody talked about a bogus price tag on this. Well, let's see what it costs. I figured the chairman of finance would want to see that for next year. Let's just do it. It's a report. It wastes about 100 pages of paper. Who cares? I support the amendment.
The gentleman from the 8th, Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment from the gentleman from the 27th. Mr. Speaker, I feel as if right now I'm on a car and we're racing down the road. We're going full speed ahead. And one thing that this amendment will do will allow us to look in the rearview mirror and in our oversight responsibilities, look at the ramifications, the consequences of our decision here today. And I see nothing wrong with the amendment from the gentleman from the 27th. We have oversight responsibilities, and this report to the Joint Committee, the Government and Finance, is entirely appropriate. I would encourage its adoption. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, the gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, is recognized to close debate on the amendment.
They say that ignorance is bliss, and it appears that there's some in this chamber that prefer to be blissful. I can't, it's just incredible to me that anybody would be concerned that we would ask the institutions that have to enforce this, that have to bear any costs that are involved in this, would report back to us what those costs were, what those effects were. Certainly there's nobody better to comment on retention of staff, recruitment of staff, than the institution that has to recruit or retain those staff. How is that unreasonable? I'm just incredulous that anybody would suggest that that's a burden or that has any bearing on anything other than giving us the information that we need to have to determine whether we've made the right decision or we need to make some modifications. Once again, I urge adoption for the last time. I'm sure people are happy to hear that.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 27th. The roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 51 ayes, 49 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. A majority of those having voted in the affirmative, chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, clerk will read the bill a third time.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2519, the Campus Self-Defense Act.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman from the 18th, Delegate Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, and I've heard a lot of talk tonight about the clouded by the NRA and our marching orders. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am the NRA. I am the CDL. I am the Gun Owners of America. And I will vote for this bill, and I encourage you to do the same. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to clear up a few things. I was not endorsed by the NRA or the West Virginia CDL my first go around. I actually only raised $2,200, and I got here by knocking on doors and meeting my constituents, not being owned by organizations, and that'd be it. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 51st, Delegate Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll keep my comments brief as the hour is most obviously late. This bill has sparked something in my constituency that I'm not sure I have seen outside of the teacher strike. Faculty, students alike are in distinct opposition to this bill, and for that reason, I find it necessary to rise and speak on their behalf that they are terribly concerned about what will happen when guns are introduced on college campuses. When I was a kid, I was inspired by something that I learned. I learned about Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. And Mr. Speaker, one of those freedoms is the freedom from fear. And I would contend that my constituents, the constituents of the 51st, the faculty and students at WVU have the freedom from fear of guns on campus. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 25th, Delegate Painter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As most of you might know, I am an NRA member. I am a Citizens Defense League member, proud of both of those. And even though ignorance may be bliss, we still have a God-given right to defend ourselves and our family. And I would also like to say, I don't have marching orders. I'm not owned by the NRA or the CDL. I can understand English, and I am not making this vote under the cloud of the NRA. I'm making this vote of free will. Thank you.
The gentleman, the fifth, Dr. Pethel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to House Bill 2519 this evening. And, I want to say that I try to stand by my votes here. I take full responsibility for any questionnaires that I fill out. And, when I filled out my questionnaire, and I am an NRA member, I did state at that time that I would support campus carry. But I had to call the representative from the NRA this morning and told him that I couldn't be with them on this bill, for several reasons. We had a nice conversation, and while he disagreed with me, he respected that I had taken the time, to call him. But let's talk a little bit about, what happened. I really believe that there is just as much opposition to this bill from higher education and the general public as what there was to Senate Bill 451 from K-12 public education and the general public. And I want to commend the people from higher education, especially the people from West Virginia University that contacted me, the people from Fairmont State University, and the people from Marshall University. And let me say, I've been here 27 years, and I've never seen the higher education community and the institutions of higher education rally against a bill, like they have this bill. And let's talk a little bit about, West Virginia University and their position of being neutral on this bill. And yesterday at 1:17 p.m., all of us received an email from Dr. Gordon Gee. And I'm not going to read this whole email because it talks about the last 3 years, how West Virginia University has led the charge against campus carry. But there is one paragraph I want to read. It says, I, along with members of our government relations team, led by Rob Alsop, as well as Provost Joyce McConnell, have worked to maintain the authority of our Board of Governors on the issue of campus carry. We have not been neutral on campus carry. And I also want to commend the gentleman from Mercer, the Judiciary Chairman. I have great respect for him. Even though we're both of different political parties, and lots of times we don't vote alike, but he's always been good to me, and I have great respect for him. And I can't imagine how difficult it was for him to work on a bill that he totally opposes. And I really believe, in the 5th District, I don't have any 4-year colleges in the 5th District. I have a community college branch. So, what I would say to the people who are have a concealed carry permit and they're carrying concealed, this is not going to affect them. They're going to have the right to do that, to continue to do that. But I really finally started listening to the people at West Virginia University and Fairmont State University and Marshall University, because the calls and the emails just kept coming. And I live in the northeast corner of Wetzel. That's 50 minutes driving time to Fairmont State University and 50 minutes to West Virginia University on Route 7, which is one of the worst roads in West Virginia. But we'll save that topic, for another day. But those universities made it clear to me and the people that contacted me that they absolutely did not want this bill. And last night I had a really nice conversation with Dr. Martin, the president of Fairmont State University. And she was telling me that, they don't have a full-time police force there. Now, how much that this is going to cost her, cost Fairmont State, and then if there is a pay raise that the people that there's not money in the budget to cover, but they'll have to come up with that. They'll have to come up possibly with money for PEIA. And the bottom line, she told me, we're looking at a 14% increase. And she said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to increase the tuition at Fairmont State by 14%. And we're probably going to have to lay off people. And she said, plus, we're going to lose students. We're going to lose faculty to other states that they compete with that don't have campus carry. And it's definitely, she said, going to affect our international student population, in a negative way. But I mentioned about all those phone calls that I got from WVU, Fairmont State, and Marshall. But that still wasn't good enough for me. So I know all of us have members in our community that we confide in when we have to make really difficult votes. I know that I do. So over the last 2 or 3 days, I started calling those people and asking them their opinion when I told them about this bill. And I actually called some members of the NRA, just like me, a member. And I asked them what they thought about this. And yes, some of them were Republicans. And they said to me, you should vote against this because this bill goes way too far. And the last person last night that I talked with never asked me to vote, certain ways on bills here. And I've been here a long time, 27 years. And like I said, I've made a lot of votes for the NRA and to strengthen the Second Amendment. Matter of fact, I've only voted against the NRA till tonight one time in 27 years. But when I talked to that lady, she knew that I'd really been struggling with this issue. And I told her, last night, I said, You know, I finally made up my mind on campus carry, and I'm going to vote against it. And she said, good, because that's the right thing to do. And that was my wife. I urge a no vote on this bill, House Bill 2519.
Lady in the 32nd, Kassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in strong support of this bill. Just a few moments ago during debate on amendment, we talked about the importance of reports, and I have a few here that I'd like to share with you today. At Fairmont University from 2015 to 2017, there were 8 forcible rapes on campus. At Concord, since 2010, there have been 7 rapes on campus. At WVU, there were 13 rapes in 2017 alone. Marshall University has had 6 since 2016. My friend from the 51st, the gentleman from the 51st, stood up and talked about being free from fear. Well, maybe the men in this body have never had to feel the fear of walking by yourself at 10 o'clock at night from your chemistry lab to your car. Maybe the men in this body have never felt the fear of running around campus and having to constantly watch your back because you never know who's going to be around you. Statistics show that persons aged 18 to 24 experience the highest rate of stalking. 1 in 6 women in the United States have experienced stalking during their lifetime, and more than 30% of women who have undergone stalking have been victims of sexual assault. This bill, to me, is about women's health. For the last year, the Me Too movement has brought awareness toward women and their ability to protect themselves and to stand up for themselves, and that's what we're doing here today. For the last year, we've talked about believing women, and today we have the opportunity to take that a step further and say, not only are we going to believe you, but we're going to give you the ability to protect yourself. You don't have to wait for a man to come and protect you. You don't have to wait for somebody to come to your rescue. You don't have to be the princess in the tower waiting for your knight in shining armor, but you can be your own defender. You can be your own protector. That's what this bill is about. This bill is about giving the ability to our students to protect themselves without having to wait for somebody to come and do it for them. For me, this is an easy vote because this is me walking from my class to my car alone. I saw it all the time while I was in college, while I was on campus. And I think back to those times, and I think about these women who underwent horrible experiences. And I'm voting for this bill for them and for any woman. And I want to make sure that future generations of women in West Virginia don't have to say me too, that they had the ability to stand up and protect themselves.
The gentleman, the 60th, Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call the previous question.
The gentleman, the 60th, has moved the previous question. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. The question before the House is, shall debate be terminated and the question be put? Those in favor of ordering the previous question will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. There are 49 ayes, 51 nays, 0 members absent not voting, less than a majority in favor. The previous question is lost. The gentleman from the 29th, Doug Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've listened to so much debate about this over the last few weeks, and, it started for me up in judiciary, and I've heard all kinds of things talked about. I've heard us talk about how young people's frontal lobes aren't formed, how we're going to lose international students, how young people aren't responsible. I hope everybody listened to the delegate from the 32nd. That's what this bill's about. This bill is about my daughters having the ability to defend themselves against those that would take from them. This is about your daughters having their ability to defend themselves from those who would take from them. Frontal lobes not fully formed. My mom signed me up for the Marine Corps when I was 17. You could probably figure out by now it's because I was a troublemaker. Last thing she said to me when I got on the bus was, I hope they make a man out of you. That's the truth. It's the last words my mom said to me. And they did. They took a young 17-year-old kid from West Virginia that didn't know nothing. And they didn't put a rubber rifle in my hand. They didn't give me a safe space. They didn't give me a list of topics that I could talk about and I couldn't talk about. They trusted me to defend freedom. Now we're sending our kids off into the world, expecting them to take over an economy, expecting them to take over a government, and we're not going to trust them to have the self-control to carry a firearm to defend themselves when we have these happenings, these problems of sexual assault happening on campus and different things. We're going to send them into the world unarmed. How many times have we used that as sort of an analogy? But here's not even an analogy. We're going to send them into the world unarmed. That's literally what the opposition to this bill wants. Send your children into the world unarmed. Not fully formed frontal lobes. We're going to lose international students. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that we forego the protections of the Bill of Rights or the provisions of the West Virginia Constitution if we have people from foreign lands in the room. I don't care if we lose international students at our schools. We don't dump our Constitution in the trash because we're afraid of losing tuition dollars. People get to protect themselves. People get to protect themselves. That's what we're here to do, empower people to protect themselves. Are we so starved for the truth that we will dine at this feast of lies any further? I won't take another spoon of it. Not one spoon. I don't believe a bit of it. We owe our students, our young people, the ability to protect themselves. And any argument we come up against it at this point is a fallacy. What has happened to this bill over the last couple of weeks is disgusting. This should have been passed weeks ago. It should have went right through here because this is your fundamental rights. This is your children's fundamental rights. And I urge every member in here to vote for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman on the 58th, Coles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill, but I have to make a couple comments. We already restrict. This bill restricts in many ways the constitutional question that my friend was just talking about. But first, let me say that my respect for Chairman Schott is only stronger today, and my affection for him is simply immeasurable. So it's not about that. I rise in support because there's been some great work done on this bill. Well, not great. There's been some important work done on this bill. But it's important to realize 18 to 21-year-olds who we're talking about, we're only saying those who carry a government permit. We already restrict. This bill restricts who this applies to. This bill restricts where. This bill restricts how and only under what circumstances. We're talking about permit carry only. That's who this bill allows and protects, is permit carry only. Not open carry. Not constitutional carry. Not permitless concealed carry. Permit carry only, even if you're 30 or 50. So there's already restrictions. Only those with the CHL that hold that license and have their credentials, and that's only after they've taken a criminal background check, passed a firearm safety training, and passed a permit fee, then they qualify under this bill, and only in a manner allowed by this bill. Only in the concealed manner. If you have your CHL permit, that doesn't mean you can open carry. You can only carry in the manner as prescribed by this bill, and only in approved unrestricted areas. I think we certainly missed an opportunity to add some additional areas of protection and concern for higher ed. I would join my friend from the 5th and say that the
the way we've gone about getting to this point, this policy question before you, I think has strained our relationship with higher education. It's strained our relationship with the men and women who work in higher education, and I think it will indeed hurt recruitment and enrollment of students in higher education. I think it's important that we get to this policy decision at some point. I'm disappointed in the manner we got there, but I'm thankful for the last amendment, the fact that we're going to get some reports back and be able to reassess where we are in the future. So I do rise in support of the bill. It's not without concern, but I do think it is not throwing the Constitution in the trash. What's before you today is a policy question that already has a strong amount of restrictions in it, and it's a policy question, and we missed the opportunity to add a couple more protections in there, but I think it's good enough to earn your vote, and I would urge your support for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, the 62nd, Doug Bibby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to rise in support of this bill. It's a good bill, like my colleague here up to the left. It's a women's rights bill. It's an equalizer. It's going to provide them the ability for self-protection. We're only allowing the most law-abiding citizens among us to carry. These are people who have background checks, have a concealed carry permit. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, this bill provides something which I think has always been, I've been a big proponent my entire life, my military career, of deterrence. Deterrence is a strong thing to keep the bad guys from doing what you don't want them to do. This bill, because we now have an ability for people with concealed carry permits, there's an element of deterrence out there because now you don't know who is carrying and who isn't. So you're less likely to do something that would harm someone. Okay, so I look at this bill as not only an equalizer for my wife, my daughters, my grandchildren, but it provides an element of deterrence that you'll never know who's carrying and who isn't. That's an important element in any kind of security or safety operation. So I support this bill and recommend everyone vote for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, the 51st, Doug Piles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like other members of the Monongalia delegation, I've been getting numerous emails and phone calls about this bill, probably 20 to 1 opposed, and many of the calls I'm getting in favor are coming from outside the county. During the public hearings, one of the comments that concerned me the most came from a WVU police officer. He said, now we won't know, if this passes, we won't know who is carrying a gun. Have to be ever vigilant in every confrontation or arrest, have to assume the person might be carrying a gun. And my thoughts turned to the great snowball fight that occurred earlier this month in Morgantown. Students had blocked the street and to have some winter fun and prevented access by city workers in a snow plow and throwing snowballs and bottles at the snow plow. And when the police arrived, police were met with snowballs and bottles and rocks as well. And I was wondering, what could have happened, if these, in this instance, the police responded with non-lethal force, pepper spray and tear gas. But if the police officers if one of these students had been armed and perhaps a little high or consuming some alcohol and pulled a gun, the police may have opened fire on the entire crowd, and innocent people could have been could have been hit and killed. And it's this type of thing that occurs on college campuses, and having firearms in these situations aggravates the situation. I just feel that innocent people are going to be hurt. I don't think guns on campus are going to make the campus any safer. There's a danger of accidental discharge, a gun falling out of a pocket or falling out of a purse or falling out of a backpack and discharging and hitting innocent people in a classroom. And we had an amendment about transportation, and nobody mentioned the PRT in Morgantown. We know how cramped, if you've been there, you know how cramped and crowded a PRT car can be, and guns in close quarters like that would be a danger to a lot of innocent people. So I ask for a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 44th, Doug Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've sat here and I've tried to come up with an opinion by my partially undeveloped brain. Had to include that. I live on campus at West Virginia State University, so I want to speak to you as a legislator, but I also want to speak to you as a student this evening. Everybody wants to talk about the professors that have came into our offices and said what they want to say, but have we really focused on the students and what the students want? I've had multiple students contact me personally and tell me that they support this legislation, but don't tell anybody that I said I support this legislation. And the first few people, I was kind of skeptical. Well, why? Why don't you want anyone to know? Well, they were afraid that their professors would be biased towards them in their classes. Luckily, I go to West Virginia State, and I don't feel that will happen there. But for the professors that I've had in Marshall in my office this week, I can't say the same for kids who go to that school. Yesterday my university practiced shelter-in-place drill. And let me repeat that for you, shelter-in-place. Fall of the 2018 semester, we had an active shooter come onto the campus from the Dunbar area. And we had one of these shelter-in-place drills go into effect. And I don't think you can realize the importance of a piece of legislation like this until you're hunkered in your dorm room, practically defenseless. My girlfriend goes to WVU. She carries mace or pepper spray or whatever you want to call it. And, that's great. I encourage anybody to do that now. But that doesn't always work on a drug abuser or an alcoholic. I want her to actually be able to defend herself. And, I just want to end by saying that I follow the law right now. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't carry on campus. If we don't pass this piece of legislation, I'll continue to follow the law, and I won't carry on campus. But I sure can't tell you the bad guys still will. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, 27th, Dr. Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chairman of Finance yield for questions? Thank you. This bill basically allows concealed permit carriers to carry on campus, correct?
Correct.
How does this bill provide for the university to distinguish between those with concealed carry permits and those who decide they want to bring weapons on campus without a permit?
Doesn't.
It doesn't. So in other words, let's suppose I'm a parent of a child that's getting ready to go to college, and I see that most of the kids carry book bags, and now most of the kids apparently are able to carry guns, and I go out to Walmart or wherever and buy a pistol for my child. No permit, no background check, no no training, but I send my child to Morgantown with a gun in her backpack. How is the university going to distinguish as to whether she has a concealed carry permit under this bill or doesn't?
To the gentleman, it doesn't, but it could be the same enforcement anywhere. I think you're getting way outside the scope of the bill.
Well, I'm only getting way outside the scope of the bill if you don't want to answer the question. The question is, I mean, we're hiding behind the fact that we've limited the carry of pistols on revolvers on campus to those who've had a background check and those who've had training, and yet there doesn't appear to be any mechanism in the bill to assure that's the case. Is that fair to say?
It's to a person who holds a current license to carry a concealed pistol and revolver.
And how does the university distinguish between someone who does and someone who doesn't?
How does the university distinguish that today?
That's my question. Is there anything in the bill that authorizes the university to inquire as to whether a student has a concealed carry permit and is bringing a weapon to the college?
Are you suggesting that the college should do a stop and frisk of every student every day? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not suggesting anything.
It sounds like that's what you're suggesting.
I am asking a question.
Well, that's what you're proposing, a stop and frisk every day. Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah. I don't believe I made that proposal. I think I'm asking you, is there any mechanism to protect students from those who might carry a gun on campus without any training, without any background check?
I guess the bigger question is, what has the university done? I mean, they could have had metal detectors, anything to protect the students that are currently on that campus now. Have any of the institutions went as far as putting in metal detectors or guards at every port of entry to make sure that these universities were safe? I mean, have they done that now?
So now we're putting a stamp of approval on making them further unsafe. Is that correct? Is that what you're proposing?
No, I mean, if we're going to go down this rabbit hole, I just think it's a question.
Gentleman will state his point.
Do we really have to listen to this back and forth that I can't even hear from back here? It makes no sense. It adds nothing to the conversation going forward, and we've been here long enough. We're just rehashing the same stuff here.
As long as the gentleman, the 64th, has indicated a willingness to yield for questioning, the gentleman, 27th, has the floor.
Let me ask a different type of question. Let's suppose that I have a child, and one of my children has a history of depression. My child's coming to West Virginia, and I want to be sure that my child is not housed in a dormitory room with someone with a weapon. How am I able to? What provision in the bill would allow me as a parent to determine whether or not my child is going to be in a room with someone with a weapon?
I guess as a parent, you would have the right to request a private room.
And that's the only right I would have to pay for a private room.
If you're going to ensure the security of your child as a parent, you should ask for a private room if you feel threatened or your child feels threatened.
Let me ask you a different question. There are provisions in this bill for lockers and safes, correct?
Correct.
What does the bill provide as to how those are to be registered or rented?
I think it allows the university, if they want to charge a fee, that's perfectly acceptable.
So in other words, if I were carrying a weapon and I wanted a locker, use a locker, I would sign some sort of form that said I want to pay a rent on that locker, correct?
If the university would charge a fee, you're correct.
Okay. So there'd be some record of that person having paid a fee to rent a locker. What about a safe? The same thing?
The safes are, if they want to designate certain resident halls, they could have a safe in these rooms for a student.
Okay, and that would also be rented to the student, is that correct?
It doesn't necessarily have to be rented. It's at the discretionary of the university. If they want to charge a fee, they don't have to charge a fee.
Is there a provision in the budget to take care of those type of costs, since it does anticipate that universities will have lockers or safes?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. We have definitely increased funding for most of our four-year institutions, and I think that should take care of it.
Oh, that's comforting to know.
Yes.
Is that based on the $11.3 million fiscal note?
It's based on about $10 million from the Blue Ribbon Commission.
Which recommendation was made before campus carry the fiscal note was developed? Is that
I
true?
guess you could argue that.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Is there going to be any record of anyone who leases one of these lockers or safes?
I can't answer that, sir.
Is there anything in the bill that would exempt any such record from a FOIA request?
Probably not.
Okay. That's all. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the bill?
Gentleman may proceed.
Like many of you, I have been deluged with communications, and I've read as many of them as I could, and so many of them follow the same sort of format. But I have one that really caught my attention, and I'd like to just share a couple paragraphs of it with you. This is a math professor from Shepherd University, and he starts out like many of these letters. I'm writing to express my grave concerns over the impending passage of any legislation to allow students to carry firearms on college campuses in West Virginia. I'm concerned over the safety of my students and colleagues. I'm concerned over my own safety. Similar to what many of you've seen as usually the lead-in language. Here's what caught my attention. Goes further down in here, and he talks about what he does at Shepherd and how he's raised a lot of money and so forth. But this is the paragraph that got me. You don't allow guns in your workplace, parentheses, the state capitol building. Why then do you think it's appropriate for guns to be in my classroom? It's hard to imagine working for a state at an institution that allows guns in its classroom. Here's the kicker. Virginia Tech posted a job opening in my field last week. If possible, I would prefer to work for an institution that understands the consequences of guns on campus. Well, like so many letters I got, there's an implicit threat that he's going to leave. And I got almost immune to that because I saw that a lot. But what caught my attention was the words Virginia Tech. I think we all know what happened at Virginia Tech in April of 2007. But it occurred to me, maybe I ought to look and see what Virginia Tech has done, because is there any place in the country that would have more reason to examine safety issues than Virginia Tech? Some of you may remember that the governor and the legislature ordered a safety report with recommendations as to how to prevent something like that from happening again in the future. There was a report, 280 recommendations from the so-called Blue Ribbon Commission. But guess what was missing out of those 280 recommendations? Nowhere in that report was there a suggestion that we arm our students. Nowhere in that report was there a suggestion that we arm our faculty. Instead, there was a many recommendations that focused on increased training, hardening of the assets, security interests of the facilities, but nowhere in the one institution that you would expect would be overly concerned about a repeat of that was there any recommendation that we arm our students, that we allow any form of campus carry, or that we even arm our faculty. Nowhere. And today, if you go online at Virginia Tech's website, you will find there is a policy against students bringing weapons to school. A policy against that. The one place that you would expect that they would react in a way that that many people are trying to encourage us to react today. The one place that you would expect that to happen. And you know what? There have been no incidents at Virginia Tech since 2007, even though everybody knew after that it was a gun-free zone. It was a perfect opportunity for somebody else. The other thing that's remarkable about that, in spite of that incident, there was a leveling off of enrollment at Virginia Tech following that for a few years. But enrollment has risen ever since steadily. And now, instead of about 30,000 students that they had in 2007, they have 35,000. And no one is clamoring for a campus carry in spite of that history. That really struck me like a bucket of cold water. The other thing I want to say, because I'm wearing down at 70 years old, I just don't have the energy for this anymore. But we have a lot of so-called constitutional experts in this facility, a lot of them. I look back at the father of the Second Amendment, James Madison. We often talk about don't pay attention to what I say, but pay attention to what I do. And as the gentlelady from the 51st said, what did James Madison do after writing the Second Amendment? When they formed the University of Virginia, they made it clear, no guns on campus. No guns on campus. So if you're a strict constructionist of the Constitution, what better evidence that there are some places where guns should not be permitted than what the father of the Second Amendment did by his actions? I urge rejection of the bill.
The gentleman from the 59th, Dr. Kump.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak on the bill.
Gentleman may proceed.
Great googly moogly. Great googly moogly. Great googly moogly. I say that 3 times because there's 3 issues that I want to point out on the bill: impact, constitutionality, and the fiscal note. Regarding the impact, quite frankly, I believe the opposition to this bill is both phobic and an oxymoronic myth. Gun-free or so-called safe zones are magnets for the depraved and the demented. Those who carry weapons have a much better ability to protect themselves from physical and sexual assault, as well as other deprivations. Regarding the constitutionality, I'm not an attorney, nor have I ever played one on TV. However, I have hired, supervised, and on one occasion, actually 2 occasions, I've fired attorneys. However, I am a lifelong lover and a student of the Constitution. I don't believe the Constitution was written for attorneys, but for the people. Its words simply mean what they say. The Second Amendment of our federal Constitution simply states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Further, the West Virginia State Constitution, Article 3, Section 22, says a person has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of self, family, home, state, and for lawful hunting and recreational use. I think the words are plain, and I think this bill actually doesn't go far enough as far as constitutional purity. Regarding the fiscal note, I don't know, quite frankly, whether the fiscal note is accurate or not, but I am concerned about it, not only for this bill, but all bills. Other states which I've served in and worked in has independent agencies that provide fiscal analysis. It's well time that we do that in this state. May God bless you all real good.
The gentleman from the 50th, Dr. Angelucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very, very brief here. I just want to talk about the hypocrisy that's happening here tonight. Last week, we had hundreds of teachers, hundreds of educators that came down to speak to us, and they stood out in the cold because they had to go through security, through metal detectors, because we don't allow guns in our workplace. We want to feel safe. And tonight, we're going to turn around and we're going to vote and tell those same educators, sorry, we don't want you to be safe. We're allowing guns in your workplaces. And so what's going to happen tonight, because we all know this bill is going to pass, what's going to happen tonight is we're going to tell people all across the Eastern Seaboard that's looking to come to West Virginia University or to Marshall, we're going to tell them, folks, we just changed our state motto. We're no longer wild and wonderful West Virginia. We're wild, wild West Virginia. I urge you to vote no tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 15th, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of statements that I've heard about, well, you can't do this because we don't allow guns in the Capitol, so you shouldn't allow it on campuses. And that's not what the bill does. The bill provides for the same security measures in the bill, such as metal detectors that we provide at the Capitol. And that ensures that the citizens that come here and the people here will be safe. That's also what the bill does on our campuses. And I would just assert that guns are already allowed on campuses. The issue is that a student or faculty can be expelled for having one there. The whole point of, and let's get to what this is about. This is about law-abiding citizens and people that obey the rules of the campuses. If somebody walks onto campus now illegally and is intending a bad act, you really think they're going to obey a sign that says don't do it? And that's the issue. And we talked about Virginia Tech. I mean, what would have happened if somebody had been able to be there and defend from that attacker? And my opinion on that is we want to say, well, a good guy with a gun won't stop a bad guy with a gun. Well, what do you think a police officer is? That's a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun. And on top of that, I mean, the average response time in our nation is, I believe, 10 minutes for a police officer to get there. Yes, I believe that police officer will be able to defend you when they get there, but it's the time, those 10 minutes in between. And I believe that people should have the right to defend themselves, and I urge passage of this bill.
The gentleman from the 16th, Dr. Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I rise in support of my local law enforcement. My local law enforcement that is against this piece of legislation. And I know a lot of us in this body think that the law enforcement can do no wrong. So let's support them right now. More importantly, I've listened to the stakeholders, and I support those folks at Marshall University, the flagship school, the school that never wavered on this legislation, that was never neutral, that was always in support. And I understand that some of us in this body are a little wet behind the ears, and that's okay. I don't fault you for that. But let me educate you about Marshall University and those great faculty and students, more importantly. Those faculty and students that hand us a long laundry list of people that were vehemently against this piece of legislation. They came up here, they talked, they pleaded. We even have a student in the back of the chamber, Marshall University. And I won't let her be disrespected. It was a long, long journey to this session. And when I went to those quarters on 5th Avenue, John Marshall Drive, they didn't talk about anything else. Overwhelmingly, everyone talked about what were we going to do at Campus Carry. So I've decided to listen to them, and I will have to oppose this. And in listening to the debate, and it's been a good debate, I wanted just to vote no and support higher education and all those good folks back home. But then I heard a couple things, and I took exception to it. And this is not personal, but we started talking about protections. Started talking about protecting folks. And, you know, a lot of us in this body might not know what it's like to walk in a woman's shoes for fear of being raped. And I agree with that. But I also have another perspective. Because I can tell you right now that at the end of the last year, hate groups in America are at a 20-year all-time high. They're not going for you. They're not going for you, you, or you. Guess who they're going for? I know a little bit about fear. I know a little bit about that, wanting to be protected. And make no mistake about it, that CDL, I've never had a bad run-in with them. They've always been respectful to me. Not a bad thing to say about them. Folks from the NRA, heck, I've gone to dinners in Cabell County and Wayne County before. Never had a bad thing to say about them. But what I will tell you is this. They pick and choose. They've been for gun control before. They've been for gun restrictions before. Most pointedly, the Mulford Act. I know some of you politicos know about the Mulford Act, 1967, California. Republican Governor Ronald Reagan, your favorite, along with the NRA, they backed legislation on restricting guns to certain folks. Certain folks, it was the Black Panther Party, who were charged with protecting their communities and their neighborhoods, fighting against racism, police brutality. They didn't want them to protect themselves. They didn't want that. It was restrictions on certain folks. 1920s, 1930s, they also restricted guns because of European immigrants in Northern America. That's what they did. They pick and choose. Pick and choose. So they have not always been for that. And my good friend, my new friend from the 29th, talked about the empowerment of protecting people. Well, I would like to say this. Make sure, and I appreciate that enthusiasm, I like it. Make sure we keep that same enthusiasm, because we don't have enough time to introduce bills right now. But next session, when we need to protect all people, keep that same enthusiasm, because we're going to be running bills. I want you to co-sponsor something with me. I need you to do that. Keep that same enthusiasm. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman 27th, Dr. Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, have received a lot of inquiries concerning this bill, very, very specific. The one that stuck out in my mind was a student from Concord University, which is in my district. And this student has went to faculty, to the leaders at the school, to ask for alternative measures or what would happen in the event of a shooter. They were given responses, as my notes here, my assistant would show, to throw books at them, try to get out windows that only will open halfway, or wait for the police to come and hope that you do not get shot. He asked me to please back campus carry, and this was why he asked for it. He said that opponents of the bill did not offer an alternative solution that made them protected, and they were put in a position where they were less vulnerable than the status quo. I urge passage of this legislation because of students like that, in a normal everyday life, and they happen to be at a university to be trained and to learn and to be the future leaders of America, that they will be able to be protected, that I can walk around in light of many death threats, fears of violence over the last few weeks, that I have the ability to carry a firearm. My wife has the ability to carry a firearm. But whenever these people, for whatever reason, whether it's the young lady we've heard earlier or this young man, there is no other alternative that's been given to them that makes them protected. They are more vulnerable and less protected than us that walk on the street. I believe this needs to pass, and I'm grateful for the chairman, though he's adamantly opposed to this, for putting it on the agenda, and I hope that all of my colleagues here will vote to support this legislation so that our students can have the protection that they need in light of a catastrophic circumstance coming across their path. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 37th, Dr. Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like it's been stated before, we're not going to be the first state to do this. So while we've been sitting here, I've kind of taken the opportunity and the time that we've had to look up how it possibly could have made other campuses on universities and colleges and states that do have campus carry, what the effect was there, if it actually made those colleges safer for the students, if there were any incidents there. Colorado allows campus carry. Colorado University, November 15, 2012, a staff member at Colorado University with a concealed carry permit, with the training, accidentally shot herself and wounded another person while just trying to unjam her gun. Florida, University of North Florida, September 2017, an 18-year-old track team member was arrested for discharging a firearm in a dorm room. In Idaho, in 2014, September of 2014, at Idaho State University, a professor accidentally shot himself in the foot during class. He also had a valid concealed carry permit. He must have gone through that extensive safety training that they offer in these states to have one of these permits. In Mississippi, at Delta State University in September of 2015, a professor was shot and killed on campus by another faculty member over a domestic dispute. Let's see, in Texas, we talked about Texas a little bit. At Texarkana Community College in 2017, a 22-year-old male student accidentally shot himself in the knee while showing his friend the gun in a parked car on campus. I could go on and on. But I'll spare the body that. I know it was also said that, there's, in these quote-unquote gun-free zones, there's often mass shootings that could be possibly prevented by a good guy with a gun. Well, Oregon, their universities are not gun-free zones. They allow this law. They allow campus carry in Oregon, yet in 2015, a 23-year-old gunman killed 10 and wounded 7 before being shot and killed by a police officer. That was the good guy with the gun there. It was a police officer. It wasn't another student or faculty member who was allowed to carry a gun. It didn't prevent that mass shooting, unfortunately, in Oregon. It was also stated that, I think somebody said this is a women's rights bill. This study here, it says that the results suggest that schools with campus carry have a significantly higher incidence of sexual assault crimes when it's permitted. And I think that I don't know why that is. I know it's often stated. Often the victims know the attackers in these crimes. I don't know if it would have much of an effect on it. I don't think this is going to make our colleges any safer. I know much of this is anecdotal, and I believe that there are crimes on campuses that don't allow guns. There are crimes on campuses that do allow guns, which makes me wonder what the real purpose of this is. To me, if I'm looking at these other states that have the exact same law almost, it tells me that it's probably just another check on the box next to a national group that goes around and tries to get this legislation passed in as many states as possible. And I know that every year that I've been here, they come with a different law that is the most important thing that they need that year, and we always have to tell them yes. Every year, it's a whopping majority of this House tells them yes. So eventually, are they ever going to run out of any things to ask for? At some point, we got to tell them no. I would hope we would do that tonight. I don't think we will. I don't think anything I've said or anything anybody else said is going to sway anybody's vote right now. But I would suggest that next year, we take a suggestion from the gentleman from the 50th, and maybe we can come together and vote for capital carry, right? If gun-free zones are such an unsafe place to be, well, let's let people carry in the Capitol. Let's have them up in the gallery when we're voting on things like teachers' pay raises. Let's have them armed in the gallery. I sincerely hope that next year when I'm looking through these reports, I don't see any reports from WVU or Marshall or any of the other wonderful institutions of higher learning in our state. I sincerely hope I don't. But I know that I don't want to have any of that on my hands, and I'm voting no, and I hope others will join me.
Lady in the 51st, Douglas Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chairman of Finance yield? Now, I know everyone is tired, and I know you about aggravated with all these questions, and we already know how the vote is going to go. But can you just please respect my constituents and please answer these questions as respectfully as you can?
I'll do the best I can to the
Thank
gentlelady.
you. What age can someone get a concealed carry permit, sir?
Well, 18.
Okay. And we already talked about if that person had a juvenile record and that record is closed at the age of 18, that person would still be able to do an application and get a concealed carry permit. Is that correct?
If they're prohibited by law, then they're still prohibited by law to possess.
Okay.
If I answered that correctly for you.
How many females have concealed carry permits in West Virginia?
That I cannot answer, ma'am.
And so you wouldn't know how many under the age of 25 also. Do you know the number of females who get attacked on West Virginia college campuses in total?
I do not.
Okay. Does the NRA or the Citizens of Defense or any other organizations offer any self-defense classes on campus free or of charge that you know of, sir?
They could. I'm not sure if they do or not, but some could. Some NRA instructors could.
Do you know how many males in West Virginia have concealed carry permits?
I do not.
Okay. So you wouldn't know how many under the age of 25 either.
You're correct, I do not.
And how many males get attacked on college campuses? Would you know that number, sir?
Who knows? I'm not for sure.
And I've noticed on the concealed permit carry application, there's a question about race, and it's just an open question. Do you have a breakdown of the races that apply for this and get approved for concealed carry permits?
I do not, ma'am.
Okay. And also on that same application, there are several mental health questions, such as number 8. Have you ever been adjudicated to be mentally incompetent? Is there any type of background to confirm if this answer is if they're answering truthfully, sir?
Yeah, there's FBI background checks. There are background checks. So
There's a background check, but
yeah.
will the
I mean, if you
background
answer
check
the-
say if that person is mentally incompetent?
Yes.
Okay. And in number 12, it says, are you physically and mentally competent to carry a handgun? Would that background check tell us that?
I'm not sure, ma'am.
And so can you give me examples of diagnoses that would not allow someone to be competent physically or mentally to carry a handgun?
That's not my job to do, ma'am.
I understand that, but it was just a question. If you don't have an answer, that is fine. Do you know how many West Virginia campuses have mental health facilities or centers?
I do not.
I've received several emails referring to the good guys. Is that defined anywhere in the bill? Because I couldn't find it.
No, ma'am.
Is that a question on the application? Because I couldn't find it there either.
It is not.
So it's a presumption, right?
I agree.
So can you tell me how many concealed carry permit holders in the state of West Virginia have been convicted of a crime after they've done something?
Probably 0, I'm guessing.
But do you have a number?
0.
Do you have a fact of that? Is there a report of that? Because the state police couldn't give me one, and I've been calling for 3 days.
I would say they're law-abiding citizens, so I would say 0.
They could be law-abiding citizens once they get the permit, but do we know if there's any instances where they may have been protecting someone? Because there was someone from the Citizens Defense League that said throughout the training, you're not, they don't want you to use your weapon, but if it is, 9 times out of 10, they
0
might
is
get
my
arrested.
final answer. I can phone a friend.
Well, sir, I'm glad you think this is a laughing matter because my
I
constituents
wasn't
don't.
laughing, ma'am. I said 0 several times.
Very disrespectful. How many hate crimes or incidents are reported on campus?
I'm not sure, ma'am.
How many professors or administrative students get threatened from other students or parents?
I'm not sure.
Will the universities need to change their insurance policies?
Probably not.
Have any higher education institutions?
Hold harmless provision.
I'm sorry.
There is a hold harmless provision, I believe, here. Give me a second.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very, very last. On page 45, it says on line 96, and no liability for any such actions of such persons shall be imputed to the institution of higher education unless the state institution of higher education has expressly requested or directed such person to carry a concealed pistol or revolver.
Thank you, sir. Are all the higher education institutions in favor of this bill that you know of?
That's a tough question. I know of one university professor who was in my office from WVU was very supportive of the bill and said we're doing a good job.
I understand that. That's one professor. I'm speaking as the university as a whole, sir.
One professor, he expressed his desire. He was happy that we were passing this bill. He has an ability now to protect himself. He was very happy about it.
So I guess that
From
answer is no.
WVU.
Thank you. Okay. Will this bill affect any scholarships or grants for students?
Probably not, no.
Okay. And we already spoke about the fiscal note. Do you know how this bill will financially impact our small or regional institutions who already are struggling?
Are you talking about CTCs or smaller 4 years?
Just like small universities like Fairmont State University, who already don't have campus police officers?
I do not, ma'am.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Speaker, can I please speak to the bill?
Yes, lady, may proceed.
Thank you. So we've heard many things, and we've heard that students want this bill. We've heard that students oppose this bill. And I've sat here respectfully. I've taken off my jacket. I've taken off my shoes. I've cried. I've gotten angry. But I want to read you two things. Dear West Virginia delegates, my name is Ashley Moore, and I am a sophomore, psychology and public education's major at Marshall University. I am openly against campus carry because as someone who has been raped and sexually assaulted, I don't think that guns are the answer. When I was 15, I was overpowered by a man I still don't know. And last month, at a social gathering, I got sexually assaulted by someone who is known to be violent and have a short temper. In both situations, I think that if I pulled out a gun, I would have been killed or at least had a worse outcome. This might seem irrelevant, but if guns are allowed on campus, there most likely would be more people like that only with guns. They would, by law, be allowed to have that is possibility I would hate to see come true. I've talked to my friends, and they've all stated that they would most likely transfer if passed because of fear. Even 2 hours ago, while I was in class, there was a shooting on the street I live on. And if there would have been more than one gun, that situation could have been worse and has more injuries. Guns on campus could make things like having night classes dangerous and scarier to take because the idea of someone could be waiting with a gun they were told they were allowed to have. It is more likely that this bill would be putting guns in the hands of attackers, not the victims. It's like giving another way to intimidate someone because even if they don't shoot them, the fear that they could get shot in the moment is enough to make fighting back an option. Please, as a student and someone who has been in a situation like that, please vote no for the bill. Sincerely, Ashley Moore. That is Ashley's truth. I don't know if Ashley is a real person, but maybe Ashley felt that her words needed to be heard. And I understand that there's other students that support this bill. I have one more thing to read. Who am I? I am she, and she is me. I am a woman created to be the host of great leaders and geniuses. I am a woman empowered with the knowledge to be seen and not heard. I am a woman who has been told where my place should be, in the kitchen and in the bedroom. I am a woman who should blush when a catcall is meant to be complimentary. I am a woman who should bear as many children as my dear spouse dictates.
The bill. Point of order. In your opinion, the chair, the lady is speaking to the bill. The lady may continue.
We said that this was a women's bill, so I'm going to continue. Thank you. I am a woman who is privileged to wear pants, attend school, and keep the home kept. I am a woman who is criticized when my body gets wrinkled and worn. I am a woman who is shunned when my body naturally dispenses every month. I am a woman who is never recognized for my wits, creativity, and strength. I am a woman who works smarter, not harder, yet my wages are unequivocal to my male coworkers. I am a woman who is shunned for breastfeeding in public. I am a woman who is ashamed when you abuse my body, mind, and soul. I am a woman who is enrolled in etiquette training to become a lady. I am a woman who is a product of all these things. Conversely, I am she, and she is me. I am the woman who will raise her children to respect, sympathize, empathize with every being. I am the woman who will use her voice against gender inequality, racial inequality, domestic violence, hunger, and homelessness. I am the woman who will take her seat at the main table. I am the woman who will call out unwanted invasions of my personal space. I am the woman who will take ownership of my reproductive choices. I am the woman who will put on her cape every day as a super mom, super daughter, super granddaughter, super niece, super advocate, and super activist. I am the woman who will see the war wounds of my body because of heart disease, breast cancer, diabetes, lupus, MS, thyroid disease, childbirth, pregnancy, and hysterectomies. I am the woman who will probably donate feminine hygiene products because shame has no home here. I am the woman who will be recognized amongst my peers in achievements of thinking outside the box. I am the woman who will fight for equal pay. I am the woman who will create a new norm for a mother to nurse her child in public. I am the woman who will stand against abuse, neglect, and rape. I am the woman who will empower other women and inspire other women. I am a survivor of rape. I am a survivor of sexual assault. I am a survivor of domestic violence. I am Me Too. You sit in this body and you speak about numbers. You speak about statistics. You speak about your daughters. There's someone walking the aisles with you every day who sit in these chambers, who smile because you can't see that hurt. If I had a concealed weapon the night that I was raped, I would have went in my room and I would have committed suicide because that was shame. That was hurt. You putting a gun in my hand would not have given me power. You put a gun in my hand in the mental state I was in. It would have been fight or flight. And I don't know who would have been a friend or a foe. That's what this bill does. I believe in the Second Amendment. I am a gun owner. I cannot afford to be an NRA member, but have you thought about the children who live in HUD housing? They also cannot have a weapon. When I first moved to this great state, I lived in a gated community, and life happened. I had to make sure that my guns was under lock and key because I could not have them in HUD housing. Who protected me the first day I moved in and there was a drive-by shooting? Who? Because it was a bad neighborhood. It took the police officers 45 minutes. But the rules were I could not have a weapon there. We talk about law-abiding citizens and we talk about good guys. Well, I'm sorry, I'm born a female and I'm proud of it. And I'm sorry, this year-round tan does not allow me to have the same privileges to have a concealed weapon. Because if there is a mass shooter and I take out my weapon from my purse and the police come, do they know if I'm friend or foe? Now, I already know how you're going to vote, so it doesn't matter if I tell you vote in opposition or if I tell you vote for it. But my freedom and my choice was to bring to this body the voices of my constituents, the voices of the Me Too rape survivors, sexual assault survivors. Now, I know there have been things on our desk for many, many weeks. And you talk about thrown in a ditch. How I wish I was thrown in a ditch the night I was raped. How I wish that he would have just killed me. But that didn't happen. Because there was something greater for me to deal with. My story is my glory. I'm no longer a victim. I am a survivor, and I'll be damned if this body is going to make me feel that way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from 39th, Delegate Malcolm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've listened to a lot of things, and I really hesitated to stand up, but I am going to stand up. I am for this bill. I'm a woman. I don't need to roar. I don't need to roar because I've been packing since I was 18 years old. When I went off to school in 1965, and I know I don't look that old, but I am, my dad, as we were getting ready to leave, came through the house, and I had my last suitcase heading for the car, and he handed me a pistol and a box of ammo. Now, I've been shooting for a long time because he educated us and taught us all to do that. And I started to open my suitcase, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm putting it in." That gun's not going to help you if it's in your suitcase. You carry that gun on your body at all times, and you tell no one that you haven't, no one, and you never leave your apartment without that gun. And you don't pull that gun unless you intend to use it. If you are afraid for your life, you pull that gun. And you remember, if you pointed at somebody, you intend to take them out. And I have no fear of taking you out. If I hurt you with my car, it would break my heart. But if you try to take me out of one of mine, I would not hesitate, because that's the way I was raised. It's my God-given right to protect myself and my children, and I will do so at all times. I didn't put it in my suitcase, and I didn't fear anybody. And had I had to use it, I can hear my father's words. I've heard them all evening here. Just remember, if you have to use it, dead men tell no lies.
Gentleman 35th, Doug Scaff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be brief. I know I've heard a lot tonight, and I haven't been affected, and I can't be as passionate as my colleague from the 29th or my dear colleague to my right. But, ladies and gentlemen, we got to this point. We got to this mess again because we didn't feel like we brought all the stakeholders to the table. My colleague from the 27th, our great judicial chairman over there, there wasn't one amendment that he proposed that isn't currently on the books in other states where campus carry is allowed. They didn't just make these up. It wasn't trying to poison the bill. We knew it was going to pass. It's going to pass out of here in flying colors, and it's going to move on to the Senate. We knew that. We were trying to make the most effective bill and the safest bill and the most encompassing bill, and we copied it from the most gun-toting state in America, Texas, where kids are born with a gun in their hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as an A+ rated NRA member for probably about 30 more minutes. But in reality, I worked hard to get back here. I knocked on over 2,000 doors. I talked to people and tried to engage in conversation. I asked those people, what keeps you up at night? Number one thing, the opioid drug epidemic and what it's done to our state. Number two, jobs, economic development, put my family back to work. Healthcare, broadband, pave those damn roads, fix those potholes. Keep our kids in the state. Fair tax structure. Let's do away with this Social Security. Hell, I took pride in going up to people's houses who had a "Don't Tread on Me" flag in their yard just to see what the conversation would be and ask them the same question. What's the number one thing you care about? Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Campus carry didn't even make their list. You know, when I was reelected, I was blessed to come back, and I'm blessed to serve, and I applaud the conversation tonight and the stories, and this is what it's all about. But every once in a while, a bill comes in front of you. A bill comes before you. You have to look in the mirror and say, really? Really? This is going to be our landmark legislation this year. We rushed it through, and that's fine. That's the process. We didn't bring all stakeholders to the table like Texas and Mississippi and Georgia and everybody else did. We didn't bring them to the table. You know why? We didn't need to. We had the votes. We could do it. We could pass whatever we wanted to. Hell, we probably could have changed the drinking age today if we wanted to. We probably could have changed it. We could have done whatever we wanted today in college campuses because we didn't allow them to have any input. Well, let me back up. We had a couple people. There was one professor. One professor gave us input. But the bottom line here is, and no disrespect to anybody, I was really moved when I came back here. And I applaud the speaker. I applaud this leadership team. I go to bed every night, and I talk to people the next morning, and they said, what's your all's focus this year? And I really took the liking in this phrase. I know you've heard it. We're going to come together this year, and we're going to make West Virginia a better place to live, work, and raise a family. Somewhere we got off track, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pretty sure our mission never was to live, work, and carry a gun on campus. You know, in closing, I talked to many students. Many students said they were not going to go to college because they couldn't carry a gun. But I talked to a lot of students that said they will not go to college in West Virginia because there is guns. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this vote passes, and you're going to wake up tomorrow, and I want to get back to work on what the majority of West Virginians want to focus on. And when you're out there talking to your constituents, just remember, I do want to get back to making West Virginia a great place to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you.
Gentleman 60th, Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I gave you all the chance to shut me up. I gave you the chance to not have to listen to me. Oh, well, here we go. Tonight I've heard people explain to me how I make my decisions. They've accused me of being fearful. I think that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. They've accused me of being hypocritical. I actually have a bill that I proposed to remove the metal detectors, to allow constitutional carry here in the people's house. Of course, it was never taken up, but I have proposed it. So let's talk about hypocrisy. Let's talk about hypocrisy. I've heard a lot of proposals or a lot of parallels to Senate Bill 451. Wow. Yeah, let's go there. So what we've heard is a bunch of people saying we need to listen to the experts, right? The people who have a vested interest in the status quo, the experts. How about we listen to everybody else? I keep hearing that we keep hearing from the experts that they don't want this. Well, I listen to the experts who are sending their kids off to college who say, you know, I want my daughter to be safe. I want my daughter to be able to protect herself when she's walking across campus. You know what? I've got 6 daughters. I'd like for my daughters to be safe too. Those are the experts I listen to. One of the experts that we listened to said we don't have campus security. And that's supposed to be an argument against this bill. We don't have campus security. Please send your children here. We don't have campus security. Please send your children here unarmed, unable to protect themselves. We don't have campus security. Okay. All right. We heard about the great freedoms, the freedom from fear. You know what? I'd like for my kids to be free from fear when they go to college so they can defend themselves. My kids know how to handle a weapon. It's not all they know how to handle. But I'd like for my kids to be free from fear when they go to campus here, when they go to school here in West Virginia. Freedom from fear. Boy, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? Let's talk about the financial impact, that $11 million price tag that we've been told is attached to this legislation. Let's talk about it. Where does that $11 million estimate come from? Well, if you look at it, it comes from a bunch of new security measures that we're going to have to purchase. Why? Why are those security measures not in place now? If we are sincerely concerned about the safety and welfare of our students, why are those security measures not in place now? Why have we not been asked for that $11 million previously, if it is to protect our students? I submit to you that perhaps there's a bit of hypocrisy involved in that decision, in that request for $11 million. Because now my children will actually be able to protect themselves on campus if this bill passes. But now somebody else feels like they need to be protected from my children. Fascinating. That's a fascinating observation there. My motivation in supporting this bill is to ensure that my children can defend themselves without fearing punishment by government agents. Now, don't give me that look. We're talking about government agents. If you take a paycheck that comes out of tax money, if you work at a government-funded facility, you are a government agent. We are talking about agents of this state government defying our children's rights to defend themselves. Anyone who serves as a representative of a government entity is a government agent. And these government agents want to prevent my children from defending themselves, to prevent their natural rights to protect themselves. Now, I find this particularly hypocritical in light of the SCOTUS ruling, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, in which they stated the police have no constitutional duty. Let me repeat that. No constitutional duty to defend my children's lives. Who is going to do it then? If not the police? If not me, because I'm here and my kids are at school. Who is going to defend my children's lives? Well, they know how. They need to be equipped, and I will make sure that they will. Hopefully, it will be at a school here in West Virginia. If not, I'll make sure they're somewhere where they are able to be equipped to defend themselves. Please pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair sees no member seeking recognition. Lady from 36, Delegates Step Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to request that the comments from the lady from the 51st be recorded in the journal, please.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. The gentleman from the 36, Delegate Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This won't be long. I just want to make a point that I think needs to be made, and that is that there are some families who where guns and weapons are not instruments of defense. They're instruments of suicide. And there are people who see guns in a different sort of light than what we've been talking about tonight. Suicide is one of the primary causes of death in West Virginia. The availability of weapons makes suicide possible in many families. I hope that the report that we get next year will include any difficulties that young people have had in regard to the proximity of weapons. It's not something that we've talked about. It's not something that we want to think about, but it's something that many people live with. And weapons are seen as instruments of self-destruction. My daughter has asked me to speak. Excuse me. My daughter has asked me to speak to you to say that she is a student in Morgantown and she's absolutely, completely, absolutely opposed to this bill. She does not want to be in a culture of weapons. Now, of course, the bill provides that this is not open carry. And she wants me to tell you that she in her lifetime has had difficulty, and a gun would not have helped. So I would just say to the members that it may be to some of us a matter of a constitutional right, and she, by the way, has said that it bothers her that a lot of males seem to tout the fact that guns are necessary for them to protect women, when in fact, most of the times when we have a murder-suicide, it is the male that's the aggressor, not the female. And I just hope that the report that we have will give us some insight into how this bill affects college campus, how it affects the culture. Hopefully it won't be a dramatic change in the way higher education is. Sometimes it does seem like we just can't leave well enough alone, that we've got to change something or add some new place that we can have some effect. But I think that we are embarking on new territory. WVU is 150 years old. Marshall's older than that. And, we've, I think, done fairly well so far as is. But we're making changes. I don't think it's broke, but we're making changes. And we'll just have to see how this turns out. But I would point out that for a lot of people, weapons are not just something of self-defense. They can be other things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sir, from the 40th, Dr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that my friends, the gentleladies from the 32nd and the 39th comments regarding this bill be added to the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Lady in the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 3 points. One of my friends, and I know we've all been talking with friends and family, said to me, "Who wants this? Who wants this?" Well, I got to tell you, the people that are going to be affected, the huge majority of people who are going to be affected, do not want this. All of the colleges and the universities, all of them, don't want this. And we normally consult with stakeholders. In fact, sometimes when there's a controversial issue, like gambling, like brunch on Sundays, we let people vote on it. But we're not doing that here because some people really, really want this, most of whom have no connection with a college community or university. They don't work there. They don't live there. They don't go to school. Those people are the ones telling us that is what we have to put up with. I am very surprised that anyone would call this a women's bill. Really. As a female who lives in a college community, passage of this bill, which will have drunk teenagers carrying guns, does not make me feel safe, does not make me feel protected. And the last thing I want to talk about are the economic effects that this is going to have on our college and university communities. If you compare those of us who are lucky enough to live in a town with a college or university, one thing you will find is they are doing really well. That those institutions are the economic engines. We're talking, and they help all of the surrounding businesses and industries, some of which have popped up, which have surfaced. I know in my community, that's definitely true, and I think people could learn from that. All of our communities, all of our colleges and university communities think this is going to cause harm, economic harm. Some people don't want international students. Well, they help every college and university in this state stay afloat. And so do our out-of-state students. All of our universities have out-of-state students. And they provide substantial economic benefits. We have a lot of jobs at colleges and universities because we offer a good value. But there are a lot of parents, and I have heard from some of them, I presume you have also, from California and Illinois, who do not want their children to go to a college campus where they are drinking and where they're packing. For those three reasons, I urge rejection of this bill and the many others that I've heard tonight. There are people here that really want this, but they are not the ones who work and study and live in these college and university communities. The ones that we usually consult when we're making laws, and we did not sufficiently in this time. So I urge a no vote on this bill.
Does the gentleman of the 64th Delegate Householder wish to close debate on the bill?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure I'm not going to be able to say anything that's going to change your mind, but just remember, we've heard the sky was going to fall with constitutional carry, and tonight we've heard a lot about the same arguments with campus carry. Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, to take your blinders off. When we hear the phrase shall not be infringed, it's a very important right. I ask the body to vote green. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 59 ayes, 41 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2519.
Are there members of the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will bring and read the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House and the Senate. Request concurrence therein. For what purpose does the gentleman from the 51st seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that this bill become effective July 1, 2099.
The gentleman from the 51st moves the bill be made effective July 1st, 2099. For what purpose does the gentleman from the 27th, Douglas Porterfield, seek recognition?
We do need to make sure that people's brains are fully formed, and hopefully that will happen by 2099.
Question for the House is a motion by the gentleman from the 51st that the bill be made effective July 1st, 2099. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 31 ayes, 69 nays, 0 members absent, not voting, less than 2/3 members elected having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the motion lost. Clerk will please report the action of the House and the Senate. Request concurrence therein.